Anybody see any errors or omissions in the minutes? Is there a motion to accept them?
So moved.
I'll second that.
Motion made and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? So voted unanimously. Next one is Southeast Regional Network High Point Treatment Center, which is not mine.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this petition is to hear the petition of Southeast Regional Network to lease to High Point Treatment Center, Inc., the former St. Luke's Hospital, for a 72-bed psychiatric hospital and outpatient clinic with 200 employees over 3 shifts. The subject property is located at 52 Oak Street, Middleborough, Assessors Map 50N and 50J, Lot 5216. This is a continuation from a hearing that began on August 15th of 2013. I will declare the hearing open. So, let's get the important stuff out of the way. How'd your surgery go?
Thank you.
You look okay.
They ended up doing 3 discs instead of 2, but
Great.
the fact of the matter, I'm back on my feet.
That's good.
Thanks for asking.
So here's what I'd like to actually do. I thought we could start by going through the draft decision. Okay? And then we can move on to, because I have several comments that I'd like to be able to review. And then, as we go through the draft, because that's where we left it while you left the last hearing in the hands of Carl, we basically discussed a lot of things. We discussed the pilot, the parking lot, a lot of different things. Came back in the form of a draft. There were some things in the draft that were not what I expected. So I'd like to just clarify all of those for everybody's benefit. And then we'll move on from there.
Okay.
And I understand that you have some new representation, so would like an introduction
Certainly.
as well there.
Okay.
And when it's appropriate, we'll enter into some discussions,
Great.
okay?
Thank you.
Is that all right with you?
No, that sounds great. Thank you.
Okay with the board? Good? Okay. So, I'm assuming that all of the members got the decision and had an opportunity to read through it. I can point out some of the areas where I thought there might have been some question. So if you all just want to follow along with me. So the requested reliefs, all of the discussion and analysis on the requested special permit and site plan approval in section 3 seemed appropriate. I didn't see anything there. Subsection 3, 4, 5, and 6, which is all the use will not be detrimental to the established or future character of the neighborhood. There's adequate water, sewer, and other utilities available. The proposed use will not create nuisance or serious hazards. And if you go to, I'm not sure, this isn't numbered on mine, but if you go to section 4, under the conditions, the first one is paragraph 4. This decision incorporates by reference as if attached hereto all the terms and conditions of the Middleborough Department of Public Works, Police Department, and Fire Departments as negotiated between the applicant, the Department of Public Works, Police Department, and Fire Department, as contained in a memorandum from High Point to DPW dated open 2014. There is no such memorandum, so that can be taken out. Item number 6 was to compensate the town of Middleborough for provisions of services otherwise assessed by the property tax. The applicant shall pay to the town of Middleborough the sum of what we had discussed was $182,500 on or before September 1st, 2014. and every year thereafter, the property tax equivalent payment shall be equal to the assessed value of the locus multiplied by the commercial tax rate for the locus as set from time to time by the Board of Assessors. And originally, we had talked about splitting that into two different funds, and it's really, it goes into the general fund, and the town does with the money as they see fit. I want to move away from the language that it has to do with necessarily a tax, but just by the very nature, as we discussed, the term pilot, payment in lieu of taxes, it would lead you that way, but doesn't necessarily. It's a matter of, it's a flip on words, okay? But that's what we had talked about. In section 7, are there any questions up to this point? No? From the members of the board? All right. In section 7, in addition to the annual payment in lieu of tax, in lieu of payment of the property tax required by condition 6 above, within 3 months of receipt of an occupancy permit for the facility, the applicant shall pay to the town of Middleborough the sum of $95,000, and then every year for 3 years thereafter on the same date, so long as the facility remains in operation. This sum is directly related to the foreseeable financial impacts of the facility on the town of Middleborough, as contained in the report prepared by RKG. Every 3 years following the initial payment, this condition shall be reevaluated by the town of Middleborough and the Board of Appeals, should the town or board choose to do so, by retaining of a consultant to provide the town or board with an updated analysis of the financial impact of the facility on the town of Middleborough. The applicant shall pay the cost of conducting such a study pursuant to the town and board's authority found in GL 4453G. The applicant shall thereafter make financial impact payments as identified by the revised consultant report, but in no event shall the applicant's financial impact payment be greater than 20% of the prior year's payment. I struck that entire paragraph. That was not something that we discussed. It was not something that was asked to be in the decision. And so I struck the entire paragraph number 7. And I think where this actually came from, originally we were discussing the RKG value, the analysis that they came up in the value. And we actually tried to figure out some sort of economic calculation that says, let's keep up with the times, if you will, so that the $95,000 in 2014 would retain some future same value, if you will, in 10 years from now, 2024. So I think that's where it came from, but we netted all that out by going to the 182.5, and so paragraph 7 can go away. We also know, if you go to the next page, on the landscaping, lighting, and architectural plans. So I'm not sure where that stands in terms of, if they are absolutely complete. I know I'm going to call on Pat to discuss briefly the stormwater and the things that he's been working on in terms of the letters between the two engineers. So number 21 was, this had to do with the parking. Prior to the issuance of an occupancy permit for the facility and due to the shortage of parking spaces within the locus and required by the facility, the applicant shall improve the parking lot and related infrastructure, including sidewalks, lighting, site furniture, and paving of the municipal parking lot on Pearl Street, subject to the terms and conditions prepared by the Department of Public Works. Once completed, the applicant may use up to whatever the number of spaces, you fill in the blank, within the parking lot in conjunction with its use of the facility, provided that the applicant indemnifies the town of Middleborough for any loss or liability in an instrument approved by the town council. So I had a couple of different points of view on that one. The fact of the matter is, whether High Point gifts to the town to redo the parking lot or not, they don't own the parking lot. So to restrict anyone to the total number of spaces that can be used at any one given time would be inappropriate, number one. And number two, the indemnification would be just merely during the construction phase and construction process of that. It has nothing to do, the High Point would not be required to indemnify just in the use of a public lot. And so everyone else, Sacred Heart, the food pantry, the parish hall, everybody gets to use the lot accordingly. So if you use High Point's position and High Point's number, they don't ever really see them using the lot. Whereas we're going to write it as if they're going to use the lot, okay? So we're not restricting the number of spaces. I believe we managed to get 60 spaces or 59 spaces out of that lot. And so that's where that's at. Okay, the applicant shall ensure that adequate trained security personnel, we're on paragraph 22, shall be present on the locus at all times, 24 hours per day, 7 days per week, 365 days a year. Adequate shall be defined as no fewer than, you fill in the blank, trained security personnel present at the locus at all times. Trained shall be, trained, in quotation marks, should be trained to the degree established by the Middleborough Police Chief, consistent with standards of training for similarly situated personnel elsewhere in Massachusetts, and shall include training that includes appropriate response to aggressive behavior. So what we had actually discussed and asked to be prepared was, originally, there was no security guard. Then we moved to, there would be a security guard. High Point offered 6 months. We requested 12 months, okay? It was a single guard on site, 3 shifts, 8 hours apiece, 24 hours a day. So that is our expectation. In terms of the training, I sort of think that, I'm not sure from a security guard standpoint, I believe if it's a nationally recognized security firm, you know, not like a me in a blue uniform. So I'm not sure, to the extent that we need to have the Middleborough Police Chief training. He might be able to help in the certification, but I would respectfully submit that anybody that's had any dealings with psychiatric hospitals, detention centers, and things like that, are hiring staff and training staff in aggressive behavior, let alone proper. So that's, I think, something that we have to talk about. But the other thing was, that was to be for the period of the first year. And I know we're going to have some discussion, because it's not like it's going to evaporate. We have to be able to evaluate and analyze the events over that period of time to see if a continuation is warranted because of what's either happened or not happened at that place. So I think that's very important that we don't lose sight of that. We agreed just in principle to say, let's do 1 year, but that doesn't mean, I mean, if we have all sorts of issues there, then we're going to continue on. And I want it to be at the sole discretion of the board to be able to have the folks from High Point come back and discuss it based upon all of the events that have taken place. Might be the police chief that's involved in that hearing at that time, doing a presentation. It might be the fire chief that's doing a presentation, so on and so forth. So I just don't want anyone to think that after 1 year it automatically goes away because we agree to a year. If there's good reason to have somebody there, then we're going to want to pursue that. If you look over the landscape, at least from what you read on the other High Point facilities, it probably won't last past the year, but time and circumstances will bear that out. The other thing that I'm not sure, I know we sort of touched upon this, especially based upon one of our selectmen's comments, In paragraph 25, the applicant shall arrange for safe and adequate private vehicular transportation of all discharged patients to their successor destinations. In the event that a patient's transportation plans for any reason are unsuccessful, the applicant shall, at its cost and expense, arrange for the patient's safe and adequate vehicular transportation from the locus to the patient's successor destination. I know that was a topic that we discussed, and I believe that it was an infrequent event that ever took place, but in the event that it does, I just want you to make sure that you're aware of that in this decision. Paragraph 26, all patients entering and exiting the facility shall be met by at least one trained security employee. Well, we determined we only have one, so that would be the least. The security employee to serve as an escort into the facility and out of the facility into an awaiting safe and adequate private vehicular transportation. In no event shall a patient entering or exiting the facility be unaccompanied by a trained security employee. I don't know from a practical standpoint whether that's even doable.
Eric, it's not,
Okay.
because if you have one person on call, if you will, if there is an emergency, some need, they're involved, you've got people who have to leave,
I think, I happen to agree with you on that. I would say it doesn't necessarily have to be a trained security person, but, meaning in the terms of security guard, but obviously people are being received and discharged. They're not just opening the door and saying, come on out of the ambulance. They're being escorted in by an employee, I'm assuming of High Point as it is. Or it may be they're being escorted in by the ambulatory service that's bringing them in, and vice versa going out. But I guess my point is, it's impractical to me to have this stipulation in here.
It's like we're
Because-
trying to micromanage
Yeah, you
Right.
can't.
the situation, which you can't do.
So,
and there is also the fact that I will not even make the assumption, I'm going to make a flat statement, is that anyone working at High Point has training in dealing with difficult individuals
okay.
for whatever reason.
Right, so anyway, I mean, my note on here is we never discussed this anyway. So, I'm not sure, you can take, sit down and relax, rest your back. I'm sure you're taking great notes. So,
take 26.
I think 26 can come out. I think the issue is simply that, every effort has to be made, both in and out, that the patients are accompanied by either an ambulatory person or a trained High Point. Emergency, number 29, emergency calls originating from the patient quarters shall be routed to a central and permanently staffed location within the facility and not directly to the Middleborough Police or Fire Departments. I gotta believe that's exactly how it works everywhere. And I'm not sure why we have the need to spell it out. But, so just make a mental note to talk about number 29, because I'd like to know, for the benefit of the folks here, how that works. Because I do agree that it should go through a central, manned, staffed desk, if you will, from your facility at all times. But, all right, we'll talk about it. Now we can fast forward to paragraph 37, and this was just my lack of experience, but I had questioned it anyway. At least 48 hours prior to any initial site work, a pre-construction meeting shall be held with the applicant, the applicant's contractor, and a representative of the Board of Appeals, its consulting engineer, and representatives of the town. My understanding is this is exceedingly just routine, but I know I've never done it, and that's because the agent, the engineer, is the one that goes on behalf of the board. So it's the same thing, it's just, it won't be a board member, it'll be the engineer. And it's the exact same thing. Paragraph 44. Within 14 days of receipt of the statement of costs, including legal fees incurred by the board prior to the date of this decision and in connection with reviewing the applicant's application and preparing this decision, the applicant shall submit a check made payable to the town of Middleborough in the amount to compensate the town of Middleborough for such costs. I removed that entire paragraph. And my reason for doing that is, most of you are aware from our last meeting, was we had never made that part of the original peer review. We'd never requested that from the applicant and made a formal request at the beginning. And so I think it's wholly inappropriate that now we're at the end of the process to have them pay for legal representation. So I, through Tammy, directed the invoice to be sent to town council, and then from there to town manager. So I don't feel that they're obligated for that. So I struck that entire paragraph. Paragraph 45, the applicant shall pay the expenses incurred by the town's building department in evaluating the plans and monitoring construction for this project. These expenses will be deducted from the special account established by the town treasurer for this project. Prior to any construction, the applicant shall pay to the town by check $36,000 as an advance deposit to cover at least a portion of these expenses. This estimated initial payment is based upon 72 beds at $500 per bed. The applicant will pay any additional cost to the town as required, and if at any time the amount of the advance deposit is reduced below $5,000, the applicant, upon request, shall, within 5 business days, pay down to the town an amount sufficient to increase the amount of the deposit to $5,000. And if the applicant fails to pay such amount within such period, all work on the project shall cease until such amount has been paid. Any excess remaining at the completion of the project will be returned to the applicant. I struck that entire paragraph out for a couple of reasons. First one was, never been discussed. It's never been requested. It wasn't part of my request in the writing of the decision, and I believe that's what the building permit costs associated with the value of the project is meant to address. So I struck it out completely. Paragraph 49.
Excuse me, Eric,
Yes.
could I get a clarification, please, in paragraph 46? Following aspects of the project shall be and shall remain forever private, and that the town of Middleborough shall not have now or ever any legal, financial responsibility for the operation and maintenance of da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da.
Right.
Street lighting?
Well, that's
That
lighting
kind
that's on the, that's lighting that's on the locus itself. It's the lighting that might be on a pole that is lighting their parking lot. It might have a use of the pole.
But that's usually on the, you can't, I really choked down the term street lighting, because if it's on the street, the town has the responsibility. If it's on Oak Street, or if it's on Center, we've got the
Yeah,
responsibility.
I don't think the intent was to.
No, but,
right. So I think the other illumination, it's meant to address the
And,
lighting that's
illumination
directly
on the
related to the
grounds.
project. Right.
or parking lights, or
Right.
building lights, but illumination on the
Right.
lighting and not
Right.
the street lighting.
Right. Paragraph 49, the fees for the engineering and legal reviews through the date of this decision shall be the obligation of the applicant and shall be paid on a timely, or in a timely fashion by the applicant upon receipt of invoices from the board. I only struck half of that. The fees for the engineering review will be paid by the applicant. The legal fee reviews will not be. So the one thing that, as I was reading through my notes, and I'm not sure why I even made the note, but it's not in the decision, and that was that the hospital would never be a forensic facility. And I don't even know why I wrote that.
We discussed that at the beginning.
I know. And I know, I clearly remember High Point saying that it had nothing to do with that and would have no problem with that language in the decision, but I think that's something that should be added.
Do we need to clarify forensic facility?
I think there's actually only one understanding of that term, right?
I can't remember this part.
It has to do with the treating of drug addiction, right?
Well, the word forensic is the...
Yeah, I know,
is the-
but, John, do you remember what it was?
No, Mr. Chairman, no, I do remember the conversation.
Yeah.
I don't remember.
Okay.
Hang on, maybe you could,
If I may, there is a special license in Massachusetts for running a forensic hospital. And I think actually it's in your report from your consulting company.
Right.
So we have no problem with putting the language in there. I don't know the class of license. There is a certain class of license in Massachusetts that allows the facility to be a forensic facility.
Right.
RKG does have it in their notes, and I'm perfectly fine if you put in your conditions, whatever that class of license is, that it is not an allowable use to the property.
Are there any other questions from the board on the, at least the draft from this perspective? So to me, the same three issues remain to be discussed, and that is the pilot payment, the parking lot, the rebuilding of the lot, and then thirdly is the security and just the language in that. So the only thing I would ask, is there any brief comments that you want to make on anything that we've talked about up to this point? Were there?
There actually is a number of comments to deal with the main document. I don't know, we want to start with those. There are a few in there that actually need to be addressed from our perspective anyway, before we can kind of deal with the three financial issues.
Right,
Okay.
so the only question I would ask you, Dan, is it lawyer-to-lawyer type questions, or is it, so give me an example, give me one. Give me number one.
The reality is, he'll have to give it to you because
Oh, come on now.
they're his comments.
Oh,
bring
so it is lawyer-to-lawyer.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, exactly.
The reality, I don't know what protocol is, so just going to follow protocol.
Okay.
May as well start then.
Well, why don't you give me an example, and then I'll ask my town council if he
Just to
should
go
do
to the
that.
microphone.
You need to
Excuse
just come
me.
up and give us your name, your address, and speak into the microphone, and you're on camera.
Good evening. My name is Samuel Nagler. I'm an attorney with Krokitis and Bluestein, 600 Atlantic Avenue, Boston, Massachusetts. Here is an example. There's a sentence in the introductory paragraph, background introduction, the final sentence, that says this special permanent site plan approval is neither transferable nor assignable. So at the outset, that would render the entire project unfinanceable. I happen to do a lot of lending work, and that's a total non-starter for lenders, because when they underwrite the loan, they say, okay, if we ever foreclosed on this and had to sell it, what kind of package of rights are we able to deliver to a buyer? And if it's an unpermitted facility, they would never lend to it. Plus, it's really unfair to High Point. I think they're going to be putting $10 million plus into the property, and then say this is, if you ever went to sell it, you'd have a property that's essentially valueless. So that's one.
That's a good example.
Okay, thank you.
So let's have Mr. Whitten respond to that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, members of the board. So this is a special permit, and the board, under its special permit authority, has the right to ensure that the applicant, the recipient of the special permit, has the special skills and qualifications necessary to receive the special permit. So as a general rule, special permits for particular uses and structures are not transferable. And frankly, High Point is a specialized facility. They're coming to you with their specialized expertise and license. And frankly, with all due respect, I think a freely transferable license of a facility of this magnitude would not be a good thing for the town of Middleborough. You need to know, your police chief needs to know, your building commissioner needs to know that this is the applicant and this is the facility and this is how it's going to be operated on a day-to-day basis. And that gets back to the security issue. So I don't think the intent of the board was to make this unfinanceable, quite the contrary. If the board approves this, the board is approving it to make it happen. But I think the board has to be very careful on transferability of specialty products and specialty uses. If this were a single-family cluster development, or if this were even a comprehensive permit, those are readily transferable because it doesn't matter who the builder is or who the operator is. But when it's a specialty use, a unique facility, which High Point clearly is, that's why you make it non-transferable.
There are, I think, I counted, with the count subparagraphs, 63 different conditions attached to the special permit. I really think you have it, you protected yourself. Not that we're not going to challenge a lot of them, but I think you protected yourself in that someone walking in, some other operator walking in would have this whole litany of, putting aside the fact that they have their federal regulations, state regulations, DPH, DMH. It's not like any Tom, Dick, and Harry can just say, I want to walk in and operate a psychiatric hospital to begin with. But plus the town has all of these conditions that run with the land designed to guard against that very thing. But to grant a permit, the practical effect of granting a permit that is unique to this particular applicant is, as far as I'm concerned, is to deny the permit because it's not even going to get past the financing stage with it. And I'm telling you, I'm lender's counsel for a lot of major lenders, and it's a non-starter.
Example number 2.
Can I just make one comment? if you don't
Sure.
mind?
Yeah.
Only because I deal with the operation license inside of facilities, and if Mass General this one day came to me and said, gee, you know, you should merge with us, and we said, gee, we should merge with you, if I wanted to move the license, you can't, the licenses themselves are not, quote unquote, automatically given to another facility. They would have to go through the process of applying to the Department of Mental Health, to the Department of Public Health, and meet the qualifications to receive those licenses from the state. So, so to me, there is actually another level of protection from the regulatory side at both Department of Mental Health and Public Health that it's their job to make sure when they issue a license to somebody, that the person issuing the license to has the ability to operate that facility underneath the regulations of the law. So neither one of the attorneys mentioned that one, so I figured it's good information.
Eric, we could just add this piece, and not to go back and forth, it'll take forever. But this permit is your special permit, and it's amendable by this board. So if High Point chose to sell to Mass General or transfer its rights to Mass General, High Point and Mass General appear before the board in a new public hearing and ask the board to assign the permit or provide permission to assign the permit. That allows your police chief and your fire chief and the board to make sure this is truly the appropriate recipient. If this language is removed, then High Point at any point in time can assign this permit and you won't know about it. And when it's a significant facility under a special permit, my advice, based on past experiences, the board should keep in non-assignability. If council wants to add, which shall not be unreasonably withheld, or that kind of language, I think that's perfectly acceptable. But the board should have control over the assignment of a special permit of a facility of this significance. Thank you, Mr.
Mr. Chair.
Yep.
Could we not change some of the language in this paragraph to allow it to be transferable and assignable as long as it's coming through the board? As if we change some of the language to make it transferable and assignable as long as it meets the approval of this board, would that assuage?
No, because,
Well, we're not saying we'll never do it, we're saying
yeah,
we want to review the process.
but that's the same thing as, the board can always decide to waive any condition in a special permit. It doesn't really get us anything. And this one, I'm saying two things. One, it's needed for financing, and two, after putting $10 million into a property, they deserve to have that as part of the package of rights that comes with ownership. And three, there are so many regulatory overlays in terms of transferring a license to of a hospital that I just think there's a highly, highly, highly regulated industry. And it's just not it's not going to happen without a lot of feedback and oversight.
So what
It's gotta be
you're
the
saying
law.
is there's absolutely no language that allows the town to protect itself from the assignment or transferring of the permit. There's no language that that you can come up with between the two of you that facilitates both.
Honestly, the only thing I can think of, and obviously, I don't know if she's going to agree with me, but is certainly I would be more than happy to give you the first option to purchase the property. I mean, because obviously, if it's going to sell for $10 million, and then you say, well, we want the property for whatever it's going to sell for, I mean, would that be a problem from a financial side?
Well, I think a compromise, which I wouldn't be thrilled with, because I haven't discussed it with Daniel, would be consent will not be unreasonably withheld for a voluntary transfer, but this will not apply to any foreclosure or deed in lieu of foreclosure, because that's the language that lenders need to see.
Could you say that again for John's purpose?
Yeah. That with respect to a voluntary transfer, consent, you need the board's consent, which will not be unreasonably withheld or delayed, but consent is not required for a foreclosure or a transfer by virtue of a foreclosure or deed in lieu of foreclosure, because a lender can't go into making that kind of huge financial commitment knowing that it's going to totally devalue the collateral, totally mess up the underwriting of the loan. If they know that they don't have that right to be able to sell it at a foreclosure sale I'm not implying these people are going to default on their loan, but it's just the way banks underwrite loans.
Well, I like that better than I do first right of refusal. What am I going to do with the psychiatric hospital?
I mean, it's still a concession, I think. I mean, it's a compromise that I'm offering without having discussed it with Daniel, just so.
Well,
we're
to
clear,
me,
but-
there has to be some language that can be put in that satisfies both and meets the obligations of your finance and the town. Because I completely agree, the last thing, I mean, you have to understand, we have several opportunities in towns, where, this town specifically, where we go through a hearing process, and we're dealing with a set of developers, and we go through this arduous process for years, some of them, and we issue the permit. And the thing is flipped, and it's in the MLS listing before we even know it. And so, for a lot of the reasons that we don't even want to be involved in that. So I think, I agree with John, and I think you guys are going to have to come up with language that facilitates and satisfies both the lending for financing and to protect the town. So I'm not going to get hung up on this one point tonight, but you guys are going to have to come up with the language that works, that will accommodate both of you. Okay?
I'll try.
Okay.
I just know, what,
Don't be negative, I can go home and get that.
I'll try.
Come on now.
All right, thank you.
All right.
You want
Why don't
another
you, yeah, give us
another
a.
example?
Yep.
There's a statement here that was true until High Point hired a lawyer. which is that the board concludes without objection that the property is not subject to the Dover Amendment. We're not waiving any rights. As a matter of fact, that was part of my letter
Right.
to John, that making an argument that we do fall under the Dover Amendment. So I don't mind you saying, I don't mind the board saying that the board concludes that. The board has every right to conclude what it concludes. The part of
Right.
the right that I object to is the quote-unquote without objection from the applicant.
Right. Now, the unfortunate reality of it is, this is your first being here.
Yep.
Every single time, Attorney Whitten has stood at that same podium and discussed it, he has used that language. So now you're reintroducing something that he has already stated. They're not objecting, they're not objecting, they're not objecting. So, and to me, it's not going to matter. But I'm just telling you that I've heard it at least 3 or 4 times, and we could probably go back in the minutes and see it, where the special permit application is being laid out. It's almost like a standard pat statement that he made a number of times, where they're not claiming under Dover. So you're introducing it now, which I don't think it's going to be an issue.
Yeah, we're not asking for any relief under Dover.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's the way I was always looking at it, is we came here trying to, wanting to work with the board and the town to reach, a mutual agreement.
Okay.
So we're not saying we're asking for any protection, it's just that, we're reserving our rights, so to speak, and obviously, it becomes a new point if we reach an agreement.
Right.
So hopefully, that's what we're hoping to do.
Correct. How many of these such small
Many,
examples do
to
you
be
have?
perfectly honest with you,
No, don't be perfectly
Okay,
honest,
okay.
just be a
I'll be-
little bit.
to be totally disingenuous with you, I was quite surprised by the number of conditions and the terms. It's not what any of us expected. And so we have to be able to have our moment in the sun to go through them with you. Unfortunately, John and I, we crossed, that he had, I don't know if he would have changed one word of it had he seen my letter, but maybe he would have, I don't know. But, I wrote a letter to him. He had already written these terms and conditions out, so it wasn't like there's been any.
Was that your 5-page
back
letter?
and forth. What's that?
Was that your 5-page letter?
Not
to
counting
John?
the exhibits, yes.
51 pages in total, thank you.
Well, I'm glad you counted them.
I did, I read them too.
What's that?
I read them as well.
Good, thank you.
Good.
I appreciate that.
So I guess, how many of them, what I'm trying to do is determine, and I know I opened it up, and I don't mean it to make it sound like this. What is it lawyer language versus really substantive issues that we really have to be concerned about? Because if it's just a matter of the two of you talking and coming up with the language, I am completely confident that John is going to work in the best interest of the town. I've had, 12 years' worth of history with the man on some very difficult projects. So I don't have any issue, and I don't know if any of the other board members have an issue. You two guys can get together and develop the language that, because the conditions are the conditions, and I know you think there's a lot of them, and there may very well be. And that still doesn't say that they don't belong, or they can't be voiced in such a way that it's suitable for both of you.
Yeah, I think it's a mix of, I'm more than happy to engage with John and try to work it all out, and then we'll see if some of them are something that is more substantive than we might have thought. Like, I happen to think there are a lot of provisions, for example, that everything goes back to the board. Every notice to every federal official, state official, public official. It's not what I'm used to seeing in terms of the role of the Board of Appeals. You have, a qualified police department, a qualified fire department, building inspector. I don't know why the Board of Appeals is like the funnel for every.
We're a very important group.
I understand that, and I would never question that for a moment. But on the other hand, you don't want to think you're in violation of your special permit and perhaps risking your permitting because you forgot to send a notice to the Board of Appeals. It seems like you ejected yourself, whether you want to or not, I don't know, more than is customary when you, especially when you have other town boards that have jurisdiction over it. You know. So that's one category. There are some categories that fall within, I would say, civil rights issues related to the patients. That, you know, you will kind of make the patient do X or Y, but you can't. You can say, you know, try. So I don't know if that's a wording issue or a substantive issue. Again, I'm more than happy to.
Give me one
talk
example
about it.
of that.
Sure.
Sam. And tell us, can you tell me where you're going when you
Yeah.
by number for
Yeah,
me?
absolutely.
I'm into public safety. I had some same concerns about.
Well, 25, for example.
Hang on, I'm not as quick as you. All right. Right,
So I
I've
think-
already addressed that.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. I don't even know how to do such a thing.
Yeah.
But
26 is another example.
That's already gone.
Cross
Okay,
that
that's
out.
We took that one out.
you want me to put that back in?
No. Let me, 29.
Right.
There's a payphone. We're happy to set up a system, but the way it works, Daniel tells me, the practical matter is there's a payphone in the hall. If a patient goes in there and calls 911, are we in violation of this provision? Because there's no way we can stop them from doing that.
Well, excuse me, but in prisons, there are payphones, and inmates don't get a chance to just saunter up and dial 911 so that we get emergency things. They
But this
do
isn't
other
a
things,
prison.
but they don't.
This isn't a prison, though.
No, but there are payphones that are accessible, and there are ways that it can be handled. I am sure that they have in the past, and most psychiatric facilities have some form of way that people just don't wander in to make outside phone calls that perhaps, shall we say, have no oversight? I'll just very generalized put it that way.
Yeah, the challenge is, because this is a hospital, it is not a correctional facility.
No.
And these are patients, not inmates. So the issue around civil rights, the state of Massachusetts takes them very serious, and the Department of Mental Health has a humongous manual that we have to follow as an organization working with patients. And if you have a situation that you have a client who, for instance, calls 911 and it becomes what I would say somebody who's inappropriately calling 911, a physician could then write an order because the behavior, to deal with that particular behavior of that particular client. But you can't globally say that, you know, that's an automatic physician order walking in the front door of a facility. So that's where the balance in that comes in. There are no phones in the patient room, so it's not like every patient has a phone sitting on their
There are
desk.
None.
In the patient rooms, there's none.
None.
None. So there, and certainly we do, back to your point, we do monitor what's going on the phones, because you don't want people getting upset and things like that on the phone. But, so it's just always this fine line between, where you're kind of drawing a line in the sand, and it's back to when, and I think this is what you're alluding to, is when something becomes a condition of a permit, we get very concerned that obviously we need to make sure we comply with the conditions. And obviously at the same time, we have to make sure that we comply with all the Department of Mental Health rules, Department of Public Health rules, client civil liberties, the American Disability Act. I mean, we have, for better or worse, we have thousands and thousands of rules, regulations, and laws that we need to be compliant with. And that's part of the challenge that we got to make sure that I think we all have to make sure that we are remembering that this is a hospital, and that clients do have a lot of legal protections that they're entitled to. So, again, I don't think this would be like a big problem, but reality is if we have a certain client that it's an issue, then you can write a physician order for that client, and that's part of providing good care. Certainly my expectation would be to meet regularly, as a facility with the police department and talk about, okay, how's things going?
Well, that's in here too, Dan.
But that makes sense.
I know it does.
And honestly, from my end, it's fine that it's in there, but it also makes good common sense.
Right.
That you want to work with the fire department, you want to work with the police department, you want to work with folks, because you're all part of the same community.
We're not trying to restrict your
So-
business, but we
No,
are
I know.
trying to eliminate, not just minimize.
Sure.
We're trying to eliminate unnecessary emergency responses
Sure.
on an overworked and understaffed fire and police department.
Yeah.
Okay? So the intent of this is to eliminate erroneous or really unnecessary responses so that they're where they're supposed to be when they're really, really needed. So again, John, I don't know from a language standpoint, so none of the rooms have phones, but do the patients have cell phones?
No.
No, they do not.
They don't. So I don't know, I don't want to get, I think there's, you want to respond to that?
Only briefly, Mr. Chairman. The conditions listed from 22 to 33 come from the police chief. So I wordsmithed them a little bit, but essentially each of those were from your police chief. So I can't respond as to the chief's concern about the calls. My opinion is these are all legitimate enforceable conditions as part of a special permit, but it's really up to the board and the police chief to determine whether these are too aggressive or meet the chief's intent. They are permissible, they certainly can be part of a special permit for a particular facility.
Right. Well, so for instance, knowing that, so let me just, one of the things that on paragraph 28, the entirety of the locus and all entrances and exits to and from the facility shall be monitored by video cameras 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days per year. Recordings of this monitoring shall be provided to the Middleborough Police Department immediately upon request. So, to me, as we discussed earlier, to me, if we're recording and we're putting it on DVDs, I think the police department has every right, provided there's a crime that's been committed, or perhaps a crime that was committed in an adjacent property. But you should have carte blanche that says, well, send it on over. I think it has to be with good reason. And again, this goes back to somebody saying that we're trying to micromanage the business. So, to me, the language in paragraph 28 should read, if there's cause, if there's been a crime committed where the video surveillance will aid in either the capture, arrest, and prosecution, that's what it's meant to do. It isn't meant for you to have video surveillance going to the police department of the everyday goings-on of your facility. In fact, I wouldn't be a bit surprised if there wasn't some sort of, like a HIPAA law or something that would prohibit that. I don't know, but I can't, I don't want to be walking around in my Dr. Denton's and having people looking at me like that. I don't know.
That was one of our comments, thank you.
So,
You're fine
but,
with the first sentence, the second sentence is.
yeah, I mean, I don't have any problem with them getting anything they need in terms of, performing public service. But I don't think it's immediately upon request. I think as a good neighbor of the town, you're going to do everything you can do to help the department. So if there was a crime or a crime adjacent to the facility, you would do everything you could, just like most people do.
To the extent we're permitted to by law,
Right.
absolutely cooperate.
So I'm going to go back to what I said. How many of these things can be discussed between the two of you and get the appropriate language so that we can move on to a couple of the other, I don't want to say bigger issues. All of the issues are important.
You know, it's hard to say until we try, but I'm more than happy to try. I'm more than happy to go through it point by point with John and at least narrow the issue. I'm confident that we could at least narrow the issues.
So I mean, I suppose the way it's going to work, similar on your end as it is on our end. So for instance, you two gentlemen are going to get together and you're going to discuss something. And you may very well reach an impasse. You give on one, he gives on one. You agree on language, he agrees on language. And then all of a sudden, you may reach an impasse. And then you have to go back to your client and say, Dan, this is where it's at, what do you want me to do? And it will be his decision as to whether or not he does whatever, just as well as John will come to the board and say, guys, ladies, this is what is in front of us, what do you want to do? So I think that's what's going to happen. But what I don't want to do is try to get into the detail of, like, lawyer language tonight.
That's fair enough.
I don't want to say it bores
It's
me.
fair enough. It's sometimes, yeah, it's boring. Hey, we do this for a living.
It's amazing to me.
Right.
And I bet you make a little more than me.
But, yeah, it's sometimes hard to tell where the kind of pure lawyer legal issue begins and the kind of quote-unquote business issue or substantive issue ends. But I guess we won't know that until we try. So, again, I'm happy to go through that.
If I was having problems in my marriage and we both collectively agreed to go to counseling,
Yes.
it's because we want our marriage to work.
Right.
And that's the goal, to come out
Okay.
happy.
Okay.
We want this project to work, and we want to go to an approval process. And we also want to make sure that we're presenting it in a way that's acceptable for both. Not one of these deals, in my opinion, is a deal breaker. Yet, we haven't got to the other stuff, but
Yep, yep.
none of the other stuff, to my opinion, is a deal breaker, unless you want to make it that way. So I would suggest that you guys get together and discuss it and figure out the language that's appropriate to make it move forward. And I think your client probably shares the same view. So, yep, okay. Did you have another example you wanted to bring up?
I
You're
did, but
just
I don't
about
want to
done.
push my luck.
Yeah, don't push your luck.
Yeah.
I'm really enjoying this so far.
But anytime you want to talk, I'm here.
Okay. Now you sound like my counselor. Not like your type. All right, so we did refer to, and I think the board also received an email copy of this small tree that's now been wasted in 51-page document. So the first 5 pages is a letter in response to John Whitten in response to a number of different things, and they have had a copy of the draft. So to me, again, it's the 3 things that really were talked about that I had actually asked to have the decision based upon. And they remain the pilot, the parking lot, and then the security. And those were actually the same 3. I don't want to call them objections. Maybe contentious points on behalf of your newfound friend. Right?
They really weren't contentious points. You know, when we agreed to do the economic impact study,
Right.
my interpretation, and it certainly is my interpretation of what we were doing, is we were doing a study to determine what would be a fair and reasonable payment in lieu of taxes based upon our use of city services. And when I made the proposal in the December meeting of the $100,000 payment, I honestly thought that was extremely fair and reasonable, because if you go back and you read the study, there is a huge amount of economic benefit we believe we are bringing to the community in this project. So I didn't go and discount, say, well, listen, it's $100,000, but here's our other benefits, so I'm gonna ask for a discount, which quite frankly, normally a charity, even when they make a pilot payment, would offset cost against benefits they bring. And I decided that I understand that your police department is stretched, I understand your fire department is stretched, so I felt that coming in and basically agreeing to kind of pay our fair share of the way and basically everything else became an additional benefit to the town was a fair approach. So obviously I kind of feel bad I missed the January meeting, but I certainly physically feel better than I missed it, but mentally I was kind of distressed by that, going, what, you know, how did I, you know, really misinterpret the intent to go from the December meeting to the January meeting and all suddenly find myself very far apart from where I thought we were at. So that's background from my perspective.
Okay. Well, Mr. Soers had no problem.
I can understand that. Because it's
You have
not
a
his
problem. He
decision.
he had no problem.
Right.
I don't know what the issue is.
Yep.
Okay. So, so let me just give you some background,
Certainly.
all right? And maybe I can help fill in some of the blanks. So the RKG study did focus on the drain on town services. And then, as well as that, taking into consideration primarily police and fire. And police had basically civilian dispatcher, hire a civilian dispatcher, put more police on the road, just sort of trying to level the playing field. If you look at the RKG study and you look at the surrounding towns, you clearly see that we are understaffed.
Yes.
Okay. And so, at the same time, I had directed council to try to come up with a formula, a factor that keeps this thing going based upon current economic conditions. All right. So then, I got this idea of, well, what would it be if it wasn't a nonprofit? And based upon the commercial tax rate and tax base rate, it came out to $182,500. And then I presented to your assistant and to the board and to the people looking on that I think what I'd like to do is just use that commercial tax base as the governor, the throttle of what goes on. And specifically spoke about how we might be able to take one portion of it, if you will, the general fund, and actually pay for the drain on town services. And then the other portion of it, the difference between the two, to pay for things that would aid the town, would benefit the town, and thus would benefit you. And so things like having more police, having civilian dispatcher being paid for, just those types of things. So what I was able to do in that, even though the number went up by 82,000, what I was able to do was to satisfy some of the things, because we've got letters from the town planner on the intersection for 300,000. We have the parking lot at 294,000. We have 278,000, I think, from the fire chief. And we have, everybody has an interest because it's important to them, right?
Sure.
All right. So I was trying to say, look, I don't believe because High Point is successful and they have a good balance sheet and positive cash flow, and the fact that you make what you make, it entitles us to have you pay for all of the woes that maybe we've experienced as a town in tough economic times, okay? So this didn't, to me, become, I want to pick your pocket. I'm trying to be fair. And that's how we came up with the 182.5. Said, okay, fine, do it that way. And then just do it based upon the tax base, and nobody has to think. It just is what it is. So that's that element of it. The parking, as I told you when you were here, as a function of the special permit, what we're really doing is issuing a variance. Not, okay, and that's That's a big deal for this board,
Absolutely.
all right? For a host of different reasons that I'm sure that everyone is aware of, in terms of setting precedents, whatever, okay? So, I believe it was someone from your end came up and said, hey, I have an idea, there is a lot across the street. Yep. And so, I started to look at that and say, look, one of the single biggest hot buttons for the abutters was the parking.
Sure.
I don't want these people all over my neighborhood, and I don't want them in and out all the time, so on and so forth. So I saw that as a real opportunity as well. So a lot of discussion ensued in that regard. So we had an engineering, or I don't even know what you call it, the document that when you go to... what is it?
Grant application.
Yeah, grant application, thank you. And where it was laid out that it was a $294,000 project. And I know that's very expensive, and to me it was anyway.
Me too.
And so, well, not so much for you. So, but, so I looked at that and said, that really satisfies a huge issue in many different ways. And then a lot of discussion ensued about that. Well, let's have High Point lease it. Well, in order to do that, High Point has to go to town meeting, and we have to put it out there as a vote to the town meeting. And now we have people that have never been involved with you, the decision, the process, or anything, voting your destiny. So I didn't want to do that. And I didn't want to make that an option. And I didn't know that if you wanted to own a parking lot. So, but with all of that being said, again, I said the easiest thing to do is have High Point fund the parking lot. So that's how that came to be. And the security, as you know, is the security. And
Since day one.
that really hasn't changed since day one. I think you're the one that brought up 6 months that you'd be willing to do it. And Norman said, I'd like it to be a year, and then we want to make sure that we review it.
Yeah, it went back and forth a few different places. The security, certainly we were looking at, originally we were at 6 months, and then it was 12 months. And my proposal, probably in September, I proposed 12 hours a day versus 24 hours a day. And then we kind of, at that point, set it aside to kind of go on to other issues. I just do want to make a comment about security, just so we're all on the same page that, in a psychiatric hospital, first of all, we would never use a security guard inside the hospital. So the idea, if anyone thinks that a security guard would ever respond to a crisis in the hospital, that will never happen. Because again, it's a hospital, and the staff who work in this hospital are trained to deal with the client who's irate, who's in crisis, and very fortunate for us that our philosophy around treatment is that restraint and seclusion, which is really the highest level of intervention we would do with a patient, is extremely rare. In fact, in the course of a fiscal year, restraint and seclusion is, our goal is that 0 clients would be restrained or secluded. 0 clients is our goal. And I think in the average year, probably 4 clients last year. But just to give you an idea, for a whole fiscal year, and this is data that's reported to the Department of Mental Health, so it is on public record that for all of last fiscal year, we only restrained 4 clients who were admitted to our facility, and our goal is 0. And how you go about not using restraint and seclusion is good clinical practice, and knowing how to do an intervention with somebody who is upset, who is not in a really good place, and how to calm somebody down, and how to use other interventions versus restraint or seclusion. But honestly, if you think about it, someone's already upset. If you brought in a security guard in a security uniform, I don't know how that would help anyone get to a calmer state. So when it was proposed about security, the scope of the security, and this is why I did say that previous hearings that really not a good use of resources or dollars, but I clearly heard was extremely important to this board. So trying to work with the board, I said, okay, we'll do this. Would be to monitor the cameras that monitor the parking lot and the outside of the building and make sure that the surroundings around our facility are safe and orderly and neat and calm. And we do that today at our facilities without a security guard, because our staff would normally go out and say, no, because we don't want people loitering. But the fact of the matter is, so that really is what the purpose would be, just so, just being in front of you. I mean, the security guard would never be on a unit. But I am certainly willing to, again, keep that as one of our 3 points, because I do understand too that I think TV plays into it a lot, that people watch these shows on TV and that becomes what they think of when they think of a psychiatric hospital, and it's hard that people get comfortable. So to have somebody who's providing security, I can acknowledge the fact does help put some folks' minds at ease, and therefore why we said yes. If that's going to help facilitate this process, we would go forward with that. But I have full faith in my staff as far as the operation of the actual hospital, of how interventions are done in crisis.
Okay.
So hopefully that was helpful.
Yeah, with that said,
Yes.
and your description of, or at least your views as to what this security guard would do and what it would look like.
Yes.
I would like you to meet with our chief of police.
Sure.
And I would like a coming together of the minds to make sure that what we viewed is what you viewed.
Yeah.
So I'm not necessarily sure it has to be written into a decision. I don't know how you'd ever do that, but I think you two need to get together and discuss it. And maybe that's what his intent was when he wrote that he'd be trained.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I have no problem with you, versus us training them or your town training somebody. It'd probably be simpler to use an outside firm who, provides a security person that has some level of training. And there's probably a half a dozen outfits in the local area that provide such services. But it's really the scope that if they see somebody, they certainly, by them patrolling the area, it does kind of makes a presence, so to speak. But the reality is, if there's an actual crime being committed, they're going to call the local police and say, hey, you see a guy across the street stealing, a candy bar. I mean, the reality is, they're not a police officer, but they would never really have anything to do with inside our facility. That's all I'm really pointing out.
Right, and so to my point, I think, it's just an alignment of the views.
Yeah,
and he may be able to help you in terms of where to go to get that individual, okay?
Yeah, and honestly, we like I said, we meet with the Plymouth Police Department, so I mean, I'm fine with that.
Okay,
sure.
I appreciate it. All right, so let's just move on to the letter from Sam, your attorney, and let's get right to the pilot payment. So I had requested 182.5 with the tax base, and you responded in kind that you want to leave the $100,000, but that you would make you'd be willing to increase the amount of the pilot payment annually by the same escalator as applied to the commercial property tax rate in the town.
And that's correct. That was actually a conversation that we had in December, that you had a concern like, well, $100,000 today is not $100,000 3 years from now. So I thought that was a valid point on your part. So hence why it's in our proposal.
And so equally, $182,500 is not $100,000.
That is correct.
So my question to you is, are you going to stand on the $100,000, or do you have something that you'd like to offer tonight for us to consider? And the reason I ask is specifically because of just the tagging, if you will, of where those funds are going to go.
Yeah.
And so, and I don't want to call it a tax, or even anything to do with tax anymore.
No, I mean,
That's just, it's not.
pilot is,
Whatever it
pilot is the standard
So
term.
I just want
Sure.
to find where you are in terms of that amount.
Yeah.
Because to me, I think we can clearly justify the 182.5. And I understand RKG's assessment, so I'm asking you, how close to the 182.5 do you think you can get?
I'm assuming the 182.5 was based upon the RKG number, I think they use about.
Yeah, no, it was
I'm trying
11,
to figure- I don't know. without
It was
correct-
11 million times 16.59 something per thousand.
Okay.
So it's the commercial tax rate,
Yeah.
and I'm not supposed to say this. It was the commercial tax rate based upon the property.
Okay.
With the improved value.
So what the approved value is, right? So, to me, and that's what was my rationale. Let's just do that every year, and then we never have to worry about it. Whatever the assessed value is at the commercial tax rate turns out to be, that's what your pilot payment is. And it moves around each year. And as I said to Mr. Soers, if it goes up, you pay more. If it went down, you pay less.
Based upon your 182.5, and I might be off a percentage point, but right now our proposal was to pay basically 55 cents on the property valuation. I know in the documents you get, you can see companies with $1 billion plus on their balance sheets are currently paying 25 cents on the dollar. And why I have a healthy balance sheet, quite frankly, compared to my larger counterparts, they look pretty poor. But certainly, I can appreciate the fact that depending who's looking at it, it looks pretty good from someone else's perspective. So I would be willing to offer you 65% of the appraised value of the property. But I do think you're in the ballpark. We did have, as part of our financing, we had to do an independent evaluation appraisal of the property. The appraisal came in on the property at the appraised value of the property as finished and open is $10,650. And I would like a copy of it.
10,000 or 10 million?
10,650,000.
All right, you said 10,000.
Oh.
I didn't know if that was the
Is that
shed
okay,
out back, or...
Is that okay, 10,000?
No.
No, okay. But anyway, yeah, 10,650,000 is what it came in at. So as
So
far
it's
as,
pretty close.
as far as the evaluation, we're close to each other. So then it's really a question of what is fair. And honestly, why I understand, that you would love to, I just don't think 100% would be close to being fair. I truly do believe what I offered was extremely fair. At the same time, I'm trying to be reasonable and work with the board and the community. So I will offer 65% of the evaluation, and I will accept your slightly higher evaluation.
So do you plan on opening more facilities elsewhere? In the future?
I hope to,
Really?
yes.
All right, so I have a suggestion. Why don't you, when you open those facilities, give them the 25 cents on the dollar, right? And if you open up enough of them, you can afford to pay this one more.
All right.
Right, so let me just counteroffer, okay?
Sure, go ahead.
So I think what you should do is, between the two numbers, meet me halfway.
And
So-
what is the number that you're proposing? Because honestly, right now we have over 20 facilities, and I
Right.
can tell you, the pilot payment I have made in every one of them is zero.
Well, I actually made a note, thank you for that. I made a note
You're
here, based on the 11 and the 188,
Yes.
182.5. It's 141,250. And then you pay based upon the escalation of the difference in the tax rate each year. Don't listen to that guy to your left. You want to noodle on that for a little bit?
Well, I'm gonna just ask you to tweak it the ever so smallest, because
Okay,
Sarah,
141,
what about-
249.
what I'm asking, it would be, the middle ground would be 75% of the value. Your proposal's at 77.3% of the value. I honestly, it's not a huge, but it's a very clean, you know, it's a very clean middle ground. Obviously, the parking lot certainly is another part of this conversation that we need to have, but, I mean, 75 cents on the dollar on a pilot payment, I don't know anyone, quite frankly, that I ever dealt with that does a pilot payment of that magnitude.
And what are you using as the appraised value? You're at 10, 650?
I actually did agree that I would use your higher appraisal.
The 11, right?
The 11 even.
Okay.
So if I used your higher value, would you meet me at the 75, then I would be,
Is that
Willing to do that.
136,875?
pardon?
136,875?
Sounds about right. I can also do, you want me to?
The board have an opinion on that?
I think that's fair. After all, it is a nonprofit,
Okay.
so I think a little give is fair enough.
I did confirm your number, you are correct, thank you.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, I figured I might as well check.
No, that's all right.
Excuse me, I'm not sure about all this. Does the town have people have a say in the
Yes.
deal?
Yes, as soon as we're done, we're going to open it up to comment from the folks out here. Okay. Okay, so move on to the next point.
So we've agreed on,
Yeah, I think so. Unless anybody, you have an opinion, John?
Not an opinion, just a clarification if I could. I just because we're developing a record here and because Attorney Nagler has raised the Dover Amendment issue, I just feel we need to say this. These are not just pilot payments, and this isn't equivalent or analogous to any of High Point's other institutions as far as I know. This is a special permit. This isn't a use by right. This isn't a use by entitlement. This is a special permit. And the quid pro quo for a special permit are whatever conditions the board feels are appropriate. So to analogize it to a pilot payment makes it sound as if this is a gift from High Point. The board can negotiate, and in good faith, the board will negotiate with the applicant, and the applicant's negotiating in good faith. But this isn't a gift. This is a requirement. And it's a requirement that has logic and basis in the RKG report and the tax base. So I just want to make that clear. We're not under 48 Section 3. We're not in a position where the board is weakened in any way. It's a special permit. The applicant has to earn the special permit to the four-fifths vote of the board to convince the board that these are the right conditions. So to characterize it as our other facilities aren't paying this is apples and oranges. I just want to make that clear. So the board has the authority to impose financial conditions on impact and on services as the board feels are rationally related to the impact of this project. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Sure.
There is a legal standard for imposing conditions. It's not whenever the board sees fit. It's, as I mentioned in my letter, it's either you can't be arbitrary or capricious or you can't be unreasonable, but there's an objective standard. And I don't know, I agree that this would be a condition of issuing a special permit, but the only thing I can analogize it to is a pilot, because that's really what it is. This is a nonprofit that is tax exempt, that is voluntarily, assuming we agree on the number, entering into an agreement to make this annual payment. And it's got to be tied to something. And, you know, the parties are free to negotiate. It sounds like you've come up with a number, but I just wanted to express that.
Good, thank you. Parking.
Yes.
So we had asked you to redo the lot, and your counsel says notwithstanding the foregoing, High Point would be supportive of any efforts of the town to repair the Pearl Street parking lot across the street. However, High Point cannot bear the full brunt of the estimated $294,218.75 of cost of the repairing of the parking lot. In the first place, it would be economically infeasible for High Point. Secondly, repairs to the .91 acre parking lot would benefit the town generally and specifically provide benefits to the adjacent church and food pantry. Because the parking lot would provide a general benefit to the town, requiring High Point to bear the full economic brunt of its repairs as a condition of zoning relief would be a legally untenable tax. And then he cites where we can go find that as attachment 4. High Point is, however, willing to make a gift to the town of $100,000 towards the repair of the parking lot within 30 days of the issuance of a building permit to High Point. If the parking lot is not repaired within 2 years of the gift would be returned to High Point.
That is correct.
So, I'm actually surprised that you didn't say, okay, I can take the parking lot expense, but I have to do it over 3 years. I have to pay you $100,000 over 3 years, and not $294 in the first year. Now, I don't know, I do know one thing. The matter of fact is, without the number of parking spaces that are required based upon the zoning, the project doesn't even get off the ground. It just doesn't meet that requirement without a variance. And so I think what we did is come up with what is perhaps the best solution. Now, you might say to me, well, as you have, I don't believe I'm going to use all those spaces. I don't think I need it.
That is true.
Well, we don't know that. All we know is we have abutters that are very, very deeply concerned and voice their concerns throughout the meetings, and we have what we think is a solution. So the question is, what do we do with that? I mean, and so I looked at it and said, in fact, you weren't here, but I said, again, it's lawyer language, I guess, right? But that we would write something into the decision that would allow us to be able to move forward with that project without that number of without the number of spaces per bed, and we would get the parking lot, the town would benefit, the church would benefit, the food pantry would benefit, High Point benefits, everyone benefits. And if you looked at, I don't know how long you expect to be here in town, but if it's 20 years, 30 years, 40 years,
Hopefully a lot longer than that, quite honestly.
maybe even longer than that.
I
So
hope
you have
so.
to almost ask yourself, what is that 294 worth over the life of the lot? And so I looked at it and I said, So I was actually surprised to see a counteroffer of $100,000. I actually thought you were going to come in and say, that completely absolves any of the zoning relief needed for the thing, but let me do it over 3 years.
Yeah. Obviously, why everyone thinks that we have deep pockets, we really don't. The project, we ended up, I don't know if I mentioned it at a meeting, we ended up finding an underground oil tank on the property that we ended up having to remove soil. And so without even getting into the construction, where I do believe when you're dealing with an existing building, there's a lot of gray area of unknowns, that the budget to do the project is not as, fluid as folks think. And then if you look at, I don't feel I need security at all. The security is going to be over $180. I'm going to rough it probably about $180,000 a year for a service that I don't honestly think I need to begin with. And then the pilot payment, and then to pay the full parking lot. It's quite frankly, it's a huge bill, and
But the reality of it is, the security could fall off after 1 year.
Right, and certainly that's my hope, but
Right,
it's still out the gate. It's a huge amount of money in year one.
I mean,
today. So I'm just telling you my perspective of it.
That's exactly
Yeah.
why I thought you would come back and say, yep, I agree, the parking lot is the best thing to do, it's the best approach,
Yeah.
let's do it, but
Sure.
let me do it over 3 years.
Yeah.
That's what I was expecting to have you
Sure.
come back with.
Sure.
So I guess I'm asking you, if you can't do the 294 in the first year, can you do it broken into 3 installments over 3 years? And I don't have any problem whatsoever with the language that says if it's not built, then you don't pay. So,
Right.
because I think the town's intent is to do it,
Sure.
and to do it on behalf of the town and High Point. So the question to you is, can you do that over a 3-year period and not do it in the first year? So that's what I would propose for you to answer, so that we can move on.
Okay.
I don't know, I think that has it. John and Sam need time to get all that junk set. Probably in April. I think we have to look at it. We do.
And I understand that the number comes from a grant application, I think, to Mass Works, if I'm not mistaken. And honestly, it seems like the proposed cost of the parking lot could come in at a lower number than what was put in that grant application. So I don't know how to put it on paper, so to speak, but certainly looking at doing a payment over 3 years is helpful, because the front end of this project is tough, because again, there's a long way to go from the construction side and development side of unknowns. But I also do think that there might be a way that the project could come in reasonably cheaper than that and still meet the needs of the town as far as a public parking lot.
And you know something, that, when I read through this, the only thing that really bothered me
Yeah.
was the bench and the trash receptacle.
I thought, well,
No, it was unbelievable, because there's 3 of them. Those things are $1,600 apiece, $4,800
Yeah.
for 3 trash
Right.
receptacles. But I have no clue when I look at this.
Right.
And probably, maybe you do.
I don't, I honestly, I just at
So-
face, I was going, that seems like an awfully expensive parking lot, and obviously,
So could somebody take $30,000 out of the cost of the project? I have no idea.
yeah.
And I don't know how you would write that.
But
So-
that's,
The issue for me is, and what I requested
yes,
was, and the reason I used this as the standard,
right. Well, it's
simply because
it's there,
it covered
right,
every base. There was
Right.
nothing I had to think about.
right, right,
Lines, signs, stripes, lighting, you name it,
Right.
it's all here.
Right.
Demolition, poles.
Yep.
So, as much as I would think, so I guess what I could say is, you'd agree to the 294 split over 3 years, but if the project came in at 264 and it was $30,000 less, then you pay $70,000 the last year and not 100.
and honestly, one question is, if you look at our staffing pattern, clearly on the only shift that it's very busy, and we still have extra spots is during the day shift, is the cost of providing poles and lights to the parking lot. I mean, I certainly
Well,
would.
Carl wasn't even aware at 4:30 in the winter that it's
Yeah.
dark out.
Yeah.
Because he asked me, do we really need lights?
Yeah. But if you look at our staffing schedule, middle shift starts at 3 in the afternoon.
I get it.
So honestly,
So,
the poles and the lights,
Right.
it seems a little bit excessive.
no,
but,
those
you know.
have to be, that's a safety related
That's a safe-
issue.
yeah, and
And you just
that-
can't, you
sure, I hear
can't
you.
move off of that.
Okay.
So, again, I don't know how you address it.
Yeah.
But I think, in terms of the cost of the project,
Yeah.
if it comes in under that, you benefit in the 3rd-year installment. It won't be charged any more than what it is, and you do it over 3 years, and it's done.
And I would imagine that your director of public works would be managing the project? I don't, or is it the,
I don't know, is it you, Bob?
Bob, is it-
Who is it?
who is it,
DPW? Charlie is saying, yes, it's the DPW.
DBW?
Yes.
I'm just trying to think of the wording, but,
No,
I think-
yes,
I
it
think-
works. That's a
Yeah,
very
yes would
easy
work.
word. It's the second word you learned as a child. No was the first one.
you heard that, huh?
I did, a lot.
I would agree to sure. Excuse me.
Oh, here we go. I can hear you, you know.
I'll say it out loud. I don't personally get why High Point has to pay 100% of the cost of this. They're already paying this $136,875 a year for various town services. And just a question also, well, so I don't go off on a tirade. Why wouldn't this be a special permit standard? There's a special permit provision in the zoning bylaws for waiver of parking provisions. You know, special permit versus variance is an important legal distinction. Maybe I could just do it.
Sure, go right ahead, John.
I think, and I'll direct this to Sam, I think the real problem here from the beginning is, as the chairman said, there aren't enough parking spaces at the site according to the zoning bylaw. Whether the bylaw is too aggressive or not is a different story. High Point could petition town meeting to revise the bylaws so there were fewer spaces required. So what the board's trying to do, in an ultimate act of good faith, is to try and work around the bylaw's constraints by allowing High Point to use the Pearl Street parking lot. Because if High Point doesn't use the Pearl Street parking lot, then I don't know how the building commissioner issues a building permit or how the board issues a special permit. So that's a serious problem for the applicant. So what the board is offering to High Point is an accommodation by having High Point make the Pearl Street parking lot functional and allowing those spaces to be essentially counted through the special permit process, which I'm comfortable suggesting to the board you can do that. But there's a cost associated with that. And because it's a special permit, and because, as the chairman said, High Point doesn't comply with zoning, the Board of Appeals could say no tomorrow, and any Dover Amendment claim does not trump parking, ingress, and access. I've litigated enough Dover Amendment cases to be very confident in saying that to the board. So the accommodation that the board is offering is improve the Pearl Street lot at cost through a grant to the Board of Selectmen under 44, Chapter 53A. The Board of Selectmen will only spend the money up to the cost, and it won't be the ultimate project. It'll be whatever constraints the board wants to put on it. If you want to reduce the number of benches or whatever it may be, you can do that. And then the Board of Selectmen will be in charge through the town administrator or the town manager, and that's a fair way and a very equitable way of doing it. But as a condition of approval, it's the only way that the Board of Appeals can assure for the building commissioner that there are sufficient spaces. Otherwise, the board has to say no to the entirety of the project, and there's no Dover Amendment trumping of a failure to comply with the town zoning, which is perfectly reasonable based on the St. Luke's experience, with the parking requirements. So it's a very fair accommodation that the board is offering.
Well, and exactly to that point is what we're trying to avoid. When I don't want the zoning bylaw to drive the decision. I think the board is in agreement that we want the High Point facility in the old St. Luke's Hospital building. We think it's, well, it's perhaps one of the only uses that makes sense to go in there. I mean, so, and it will take care of 15 years worth of looking at that arc. So the issue is, and I agree with John, it doesn't, if there's a cost savings in, that we can enjoy in reducing that,
We'll look at it.
that's fine. I mean, that's great. So, you know, I think it's a fair offer in view of the parking to go ahead and have that done. And I'm offering to have that split over 3 years to help minimize your first year impact and then subsequent years after that. So it's to you. I mean, it's completely up to you.
Just one sentence, and then I'll get it, because it's really, this is really all about money. I mean, it's, John and I could have very erudite discussion of the legal issues, but it really comes down to an agreement as to money, but I will say that I do disagree with John respectfully on his interpretation of the Dover Amendment and parking. It's a balancing test when it comes to parking, and there are cases that basically say you cannot use parking to defeat a Dover Amendment use, especially when you have an existing footprint that only allows for so many parking spaces, but that's an aside. But where I'm hung up is why they have to pay 100% of it. I mean, we've set forth an argument, you may not agree with it, that what's on the site is sufficient in terms of the staffing, in terms of visitors to the site. We think it's sufficient. You disagree, and that you have every right to do that. So I think we should compromise and say, okay, there's this lot across the street, we'll pay a portion of it. The part I'm hung up on is the 100% part.
Right. And so, for me, let me just respond to that. For me, I have no idea if your facility has enough spaces on the lot to accommodate all of the people that you have coming, going, working, whatever the case may be. No clue. I do know that in relief against the zoning bylaw, you don't have anywhere near the number of spaces that you have. And the zoning bylaw was in part put together with the number of spaces per bed based upon hospitals, okay? And obviously, somebody just didn't wake up one day and say, you know something, let's increase that to 8 spaces per bed, or whatever the number is. So there was a logical thought process that went into all of the development of the number of spaces that are needed under the bylaw.
I thought it was, we got caught in the any other use provision based on square foot, that there was no.
No, you don't have enough spaces on that locus.
Right, but only because there was no zoning for parking, there was no kind of category for number of spaces for parking. For hospitals, I mean, it was like any other use, it's per square foot.
Right.
But Tibbetts did an analysis, said
Right.
that for the zoning codes that actually regulated parking according to zoning, this is what they did per bed, and we would have complied.
Right.
But
And so the issue for me getting to your 100% is not knowing any of those things and not knowing what the use would be in terms of your peak times and peak hours and all of that, and even more importantly that, more specifically the abutters and all of their shared concerns. And you want to know something, quite frankly? It was someone on your side that brought it to me. So they thought it was a great idea. So to me, I think it's a very nice gesture and a nice gift to the town. You get the thing done, the town benefits, the neighborhood benefits, the people that are currently using it benefits, and everybody is happy. So I don't know if that satisfactorily answers your question as to whether or not why High Point should bear 100%. But to me, High Point is 100% of the one that's driving the bus right now.
Well, I think we respectfully disagree, and oftentimes when people respectfully disagree with each other, they compromise, and that's what we're asking for.
I did. I'm splitting it over 3 years.
Well, I can't speak for I was hoping
I
for a
know.
compromise as to the actual dollar amount.
I just want to make one proposal. Since the actual construction of the project is about a year to the facility would open, and I do know the history of the community trying to receive funding from MassWorks and other government entities to help improve the infrastructure of the community that have not been successful. I would ask that the condition be that we would pay the maximum of, per your report, over 3 years, unless we are successful, because I do believe if we did a grant application with the town to MassWorks, in light of the large investment we're making in downtown Middleborough, that we may be successful in receiving grant funding for the project. That would obviously potentially might go beyond the parking lot, but at the very least, if we were successful in receiving grant funds to provide the parking lot, we obviously would still be willing to make the payment if we were unsuccessful, but I would love to have the opportunity to work with your town and trying to reach out, because there certainly are dollars available out there for grants and infrastructure in communities that are historically used for these type of purposes. So if you would be willing to accept that as part of it, I mean, the reality is, you know, we have a year to, I have any cars in the parking lot to begin with, even my own parking lot. So I think there is time to try to alleviate the expense to both the town and our organization, because it is, at the end of the day,
The town
it's
has
a lot of
no
dollars.
expense to it.
No, I understand, but I'm saying,
No, I
obviously,
thought you
you,
just said you're going to alleviate the expense to the town.
well,
and-
the town obviously wanted to do this parking lot over the last few years, so
Right.
that was what I was referring to.
Right.
That's what I was referring to by the expense, because certainly the parking lot needs to be redone. It'd be, I'd agree there'd be a great benefit to downtown to have a new parking lot.
Yeah, I guess the only problem I have is,
Sure.
you know, contingency upon contingencies upon contingencies.
only one.
To me, no, I understand that.
Okay.
But that one, my expectation is the parking lot's done and operable when you open,
Mhm.
okay? And that should probably be the goal, period. So to me, if something happened in terms of a grant after the fact, that something that you applied for, and it was done, I would just like your commitment of the gift to the town for that project over 3 years. And I don't want to muddy the water with anything that you might be doing on the side.
Well, most of the grants I was looking at actually are grants that we would need to partner with the town, and not
Yeah, we'd
grants
have
that,
to partner with the
they
town.
wouldn't be grants that we would be able, because the
Apply for
normally,
themselves.
you know, restrained to municipalities.
Yeah.
Can I
Go
have
ahead.
one
Yeah,
other
go
question?
ahead.
The estimate for the paving of the parking lot, as you said, those benches and the
Yep.
trash barrels seem excessively expensive.
Yeah.
Could we have the DPW give us an estimate for paving and striping?
Well, I guess
I
to
don't know
answer
where
your question.
where did that
Yeah.
estimate come from? It seems
Well, I
high.
actually believe it comes from DPW, based upon best guess or best practices, and that's what,
That's
this is
where
how
it
these
did
are
come
developed. Right. Now, I'm not exactly sure, I don't even know, is this dated? When was this done? I guess my point is, I have no idea. So for instance, asphalt right now may be much more expensive today than when this thing was projected, I don't know.
Yeah,
And yet, something else might be much cheaper. So I don't know.
So
But-
wouldn't it be a good idea for us to reconfirm the cost for the paving without the expense, we don't need the expensive benches and, you know, that.
Trash bins.
Trash bins. I think that's really not necessary.
Right.
But to reconfirm somehow the cost of paving,
Well, yeah, I just don't, I don't know how.
so that
because
we're
these-
all,
I have no idea how long that would take to do. I think it's a pretty lengthy process.
Well, would you be willing to at least remove those additional ancillary items from that
You mean the
proposal?
3 trash containers and the bench?
Well, you told me they were like $600 apiece.
Yeah, if you want to go down, you know something, Dan?
I mean, there are
You
some
wanna go
oddball, I
down
don't have the document in front of you, it sounds like,
$6,300.
yeah.
So instead of 294, 218, take the trash cans off, that's great.
And then obviously that'd
Then you
be,
do it over 3 years and you pay it each year for 3 years.
and that obviously would be the cap of the
That's the
payment,
cap.
and if it could be done for less, we would pay less.
And that's right, and the last year payment would go as a balance to you.
Okay, and the specification, I'm sure there's standard specifications that towns use for building parking lots, I'm assuming.
Yeah, I think what you need to do is,
Yeah.
just as we discussed, get with the
Okay.
DPW and go over it.
That's
Now, I
fine.
just want to just make a
Sure.
comment.
Yes,
We eliminated the expensive 3 receptacles.
there you go,
bench.
there you go.
It
Yeah.
doesn't mean that 3 receptacles don't belong there and a bench.
I hear
It
you,
just doesn't have to be $6,300 worth, all right?
right,
I'm serious,
okay,
so.
thank you.
All right, and then the last issue, which was the security, we're beyond that now, right?
Yeah, I don't know if it would make sense, should the two attorneys discuss, because obviously, what the criteria, we're looking at a year down the road, I'm not really sure when we come back exactly what you want to look at, or is that just open-ended?
I think what we wanted to do was to basically review what had gone on at the facility over the course of that year with the police chief.
Yep.
And basically have a discussion about where we're at and whether the service was required to stay on, or if we could drop it at that point.
Any comment?
You don't have any other security personnel at any of your other facilities currently?
None of our inpatient facilities, we do operate one outpatient clinic that
It's a
provides security for, I think, 3 hours a day. And it's a methadone service, which is typical for that type of service, to have security during dosing times. But none of my regular inpatient detoxes and my psychiatric hospital, none of them provide any security at all.
Okay, so theoretically, if we went a year without incidences that were of any significance, then we could review this at that time, but we'd obviously like the input of the police
Sure.
department and having somebody who's
Well, certainly
actually...
their data would make sense to look at. Any comments on the language, Sam, around that? Yeah, we can. I'm more concerned about when we come back a year from now, what is, I just wouldn't, you know, obviously, it's just so open-ended, is my concern.
Excuse me,
Yes.
you've just stated that it's, if we've got the permit through, you're looking at a year from when we approve, before you open.
That is correct, yes.
So you're going to have to put some language in that any meetings to review security would have to be a year from opening.
Absolutely, yes, I agree.
And
Yes.
I think that it may seem very obvious and.
No, that's fine.
But it's
Sure.
got to be there so that we have a date to start, we
Right.
have a date for the review, and we can sit down and,
Yeah.
you say you're willing to sit down and talk with the police
Sure.
chief. The lawyers are going to speak lawyerese at each
Yeah.
other. And we can at least at this point then be able to say, all right, contrary to what we have heard of constant problems such as may have been in Plymouth, we have found we do not have this, that, and the other. This is not a problem.
Could I just clarify one point?
Yes.
In the decision, we're not going to let 365 days expire and then say, okay, let's review the log. In the decision, Dan, or a representative of High Point, has to meet quarterly, no less frequently than quarterly, with
Yeah, that's fine.
the fire chief and the police chief, and they're going to review, and this is going to be online changes and online improvements, and they're going to do everything they can, and to the degree that High Point can reasonably accept the suggestions from the two department heads, he will implement changes that hopefully will minimize the discussion come 365 days. I mean, you will have had 4 meetings, or 3 meetings anyway, with the department heads. And I think just by doing that, and once we develop this comfortability, that you may go every 6 months, every year, whatever the case may be. But the security could end after a year. Okay?
Yeah, we just can't have language that says we will implement whatever they suggest, because they could suggest theoretically we need 5 security guards or something.
Right,
So-
and that's why I said to the extent that it's reasonable. And I think, again, you guys can decide on the language.
Okay, thank you.
So, so that, just before I lose the thought and before we open it up to comments from the audience here, so to me, what I see happening is we have the two of you getting together and going over our draft with the notes that I made, your notes that we now changed a little bit, right? The number of 136, whatever,
136,875.
875, that's a number that I'm sure you have, and
294.
then the language, and that coming together of a final document. So I think we can say we agree in principle with everything that we've talked about, and that you guys will be able to get that language worked out. Is that about right? All right, so I guess what I'd like to do is just open it up to anybody that has a question or a comment.
Excuse me,
And the only thing that
Do we think at this point about a date?
No,
They
we'll
have the
figure out,
draft
when we go to figure out how long it's gonna take for that process to take, then we'll appropriately
All right.
reschedule the final hearing. So the only thing I would ask each individual that comes to the podium, if you would just give your name and address, and please come up.
Thank you. My name's Kathy DeRuiter. I live at 109 Plymouth Street in Middleborough. Quick background, I've been a nurse for 11 years. I did want to acknowledge the fact that Dan is correct on his regulations, statements about not being able to do certain things because they're not incarcerated people. We deal with that all the time. I've worked in multiple locations as far as nursing goes. I've worked in Boston, I've worked in Brockton, we've worked in facilities that have drug and alcohol patients who, are quite difficult to deal with sometimes. They're not there necessarily because they choose to be there. They're there sometimes because the court mandates that's what they need to do. When I was working in Boston at this facility, it was a good weekend when we didn't have to call 911 to break up fights between patients or patients' families who had taken them out of the facility without permission, which had to go find them. We also had to have patients' families removed. I understand this project is probably going to go through, but in addressing the security issue, I do believe that there needs to be more than one security person there. Brockton Hospital has probably 5 to 10 security guards on staff all the time. And as I was working, just even as a rehab aide before I got my nurse's license, I worked on the head injury unit of a rehab hospital, and there were certainly more than 4 cases a year where we actually had to restrain people. We were trained in restraint techniques, so it is obvious that, High Point staff would have that as well. But having uniformed police, I found in seeing them come in, it usually makes the people who are committing the transgressions to kind of smarten up a little bit. They see them, they're used to dealing with these folks, having had a few encounters with the law in the past. They kind of say, oh, now, no matter what state they're in, they usually kind of go, okay, I need to stop doing this behavior. It doesn't usually escalate the problem. So I really feel that having additional security there are other concerns that I saw while I was working at those facilities, that there are thefts in the facilities, so obviously security guards would be helpful in that situation as well. They sometimes can hide alcohol in their rooms. We've had patients, have delivery people bring alcohol. They've smoked pot in their rooms. So there's a lot of security things that do go on at this level. And I can't speak to it enough to say that this is extremely important to address that, especially where it's in downtown. I think it's going to potentially have a magnet to the folks that are kind of supplying some of these folks with their substance abuse of choice. Some of them, like I said, some of them don't want to be there. As far as the 911 calls, there is a fair amount of drain on the resources. I'm also going to speak to that $187,000. I don't believe that's an unreasonable amount of money. I work for a nonprofit healthcare facility now. We pay $180,000 to our parent company, and they give us far less than what the town would be giving High Point in terms of service. So I think it may not come up again for a renegotiation, but I think it really needs to be looked at as far as the drain on the resources of this town. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Mr. Chairman, I think you folks have been very fair in your negotiations, but I think the second meeting, the president of High Point told us that he's going to be able to retrofit this facility for half of what it would cost to build a new facility. The $300,000 for the parking lot, the 100 and, I know you've already negotiated away from the 180, is less than 5% that would be added to the cost of the building that he's already going to be able to rehab for half the cost. This is a windfall for High Point. I provided you the assessment by CPA and former board chairman Al Rulo that said, based upon the balance sheet, the net income 2011 to 2010 was over $1 million, 2012 to 2011 was over $2 million. These people have the money. So I would just ask you not to bend too far. Clearly, the rehab of the building has been an eyesore. But one of the things that, whether it was at the Board of Selectmen meeting or you folks talked about, was jobs. I've heard nothing about permanent jobs for Middleborough residents, even when we've done in the past TIF agreements. So in lieu of, to reduce taxes, there was some commitment to permanent job placement. And when it didn't happen, we took the money off the table, the state did, and they had to pay us back tax dollars that had been promised as relief for the opportunity for jobs. 700, our own census says 795 healthcare professionals in Middleborough, which isn't, I can assure you, is not 200 psychiatric nurses. So I would like to see if you folks would get some type of agreement from High Point on that potential employment opportunity, because that was a big part of your decision and the Board of Selectmen's decision to write that letter of support for this. And I think we saw that a little bit of chicken and the egg. They wrote a letter of support. If you folks approved it, you folks talked about it and kind of looked at that as a letter of, why don't you guys support it, because we wrote a letter of support. So again, I just ask you to take a look at that. Traffic, you heard from Ruth, and there's been no relief on traffic, so giving any major relief on either the in lieu of tax payment or whatever you want to call it. Christmas tree shop, other places have come into town. I'm sitting in the back of the room and I just sound like we're getting nickeled and dimed from an organization that is going to have their largest facility in Middleborough and their most profitable facility. I mean, these people are going to be there full time, so they got to be paying more than somebody that's just coming in for the day. Over 3,600 patients, of which if everybody from Middleborough went to High Point, would only be, to their number, less than 500. So we're going to have an influx of over 80% of their population that comes out from out of town, and they're nickel and diming us about trash cans and a bench. And I don't want to do security, and I don't want to pay you what you asked for in taxes. It just sits wrong. And so again, I know that you've negotiated some things. I would ask you to, not back down, and I'd be happy if you were asking for more. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Hi, my name is Bob Sackey. I'm owner of a business at 177 Center Street in downtown Middleborough. I've spent a lot of money over the years building up my properties, and I'm glad to see that someone's ready to invest some more money in downtown Middleborough. The hospital is a long-awaited thing. The question of the parking lot, one thing I would like to point out to the applicants. If the applicants pay 100% of the cost of the parking lot, it will get done. If they ask the town to pay a share of it, that means the town has to go to a town meeting with a warrant article to get an appropriation, which may not pass. Then they still have to pay it all themselves. Without the parking, they don't have a facility. If they had to go out and buy an acre of land to get the parking they needed, they'd pay over $300,000 for that land. So I think you've been very reasonable on that requirement. The other things, I'm glad to see you're working out some compromise on the pilot. You've got to let them win one battle somewhere along the line. Paying that lawyer a lot of money there. The security will be worked out between the appropriate people. As far as those other 48 details that the lawyerese people have to talk about, if they were paid a flat rate rather than an hourly rate, they'd get it done very quickly. Thank you.
Seen the 990 from High Point?
No, not that I can recall.
No?
Well, actually, the last gentleman, he had it hired for an accountant to look at our audited financials, that's what he referred to.
Okay. So, but you folks haven't seen
I
the
haven't seen it.
990?
No, but we were given the analysis that done was former selectmen.
With all due
based on
respect, I believe you probably should look at their 990 being a nonprofit. Because I've seen my own 990 for my company, and I'm appalled.
And it's available on the internet.
So a couple of other things, if nobody else wants to be heard at this point. So, Pat, I'm assuming that you're going to, you have addressed all the issues that Ruth made a note of in the comments that, I mean, I know we just addressed the parking one, which was the first one you indicated as the ZBA, but are there any outstanding issues that you're aware of?
You're asking in terms of the town planners? There's a couple of minor ones. But as far as the stormwater goes, I believe I had sent a letter over on Monday. They are mitigating the roof runoff from the facility, which right now is not mitigated, so that flows off-site. So they are, post-development or post-construction, the runoff from that site will be less than it is today. So they are mitigating it to an extent. The town planner had asked for some additional mitigation. They did provide some additional rain gardens at the edge of the parking lot. So there is a little bit of additional mitigation. It's just not, if they're constructing it new today, it wouldn't be up to standards, but it is going to be less runoff than what's there today. The rest of the comments in the town planner's letter, I think, are fairly minor in nature, and I don't think that there's anything in there that's really substantive that we really have to go into at this point. The only other thing that I want to comment on is they sent me over a revised lighting intensity plan today, and there are 3 lights near the west property line that are globe-style lights, and the intensity plan shows that they're 360-degree illumination, so they do reflect on the abutter's property. So I'm just suggesting that we probably want different fixtures for
Yeah,
those
we have
lights.
to change that,
Yeah, we
period.
can shield that.
That's
Right.
not even a discussion. That
Right.
You tell them what they have to put up, and that's what they'll put up.
Okay, and that's about it right now.
Okay. So, to me, we have a couple of things. So, we're absent of a finalized landscaping plan. We're absent of a final lighting plan. We're architecturals and things like that. So, my assumption is that we're going to work very diligently to make sure that those are done and complete and signed off on by everybody, okay, in terms of this, so that we can move on. You guys are simultaneously going to be working on the language, and then we can go ahead and rewrite the draft to a final, and then take it from there. So, and even if there was a subject, if you will, that had to do with a plan or whatever the case may be, we can still approve the permit, subject to getting those corrected, like, for instance, in 10 days prior to the 14-day filing, that type of deal. So, although it's not a deal breaker, I want to make sure that we are on par to be able to get this done. So we have 2 things. John, do you have something that you'd like to add before we figure out a continuance date?
The only thing, Mr. Chairman, in terms of substantive input that I need from the board, I don't think Sam and I could negotiate this without the board's input. On page 6 of the draft, it's condition number 19, and it goes to one of the previous speakers' discussion about local hiring preference. So I put that in as a needed discussion regarding local hiring preference. Again, the applicant hasn't offered, the board hasn't really discussed it in any detail. So at the board's convenience, if you would deliberate, discuss, request the applicant's position on that, that would be very helpful.
Okay. So that's for us to do, okay? And I think that's fine. So my question to the 2 of you, Sam and John, how much time do you need to get language done? I think Dan's part is done.
What I think might be helpful is, Sam has the board's draft, so if Sam, you also have a Word version, so if Sam sends me a red line, it's a public document, we'll route it through Tammy, so the board will have access to it, as will the public. then Sam and I can go back and forth. The board chooses the next meeting date. That'll give us a deadline to work towards, say a week in advance of the board's meeting date. We'll have what we can agree on, and those issues we can't agree on, we'll bring to the board at your next meeting.
Okay, so how much time do you guys think you'll need? I mean, I'm trying to be sensitive to everyone. What's the next date? Tammy?
Sure. Tammy, when's the,
Of March? I'm going to be, no, I will not be here on the 13th of March. I will be in Rome.
Rome.
We could all go
Yes.
to Rome. To sign.
What's the
27?
27th? You're out of town on the 27th?
yes.
Well, no, March 13th is the first date, but one of the board members that's sitting that requires a signature will not be here.
What's the first one in April?
So,
We push out to
I mean,
April.
my thought is, hopefully, most of the work will be done for the 27th meeting, and someone else from Sam's office could take his place.
okay.
Okay, that's fine.
But, I mean, just,
I mean, to me, I'm hoping that there's gonna be such an awesome job done between you
Well-
guys that we have nothing to talk about other
Honestly,
than
it's-
where do we sign?
that's what I'm hoping to.
Right.
So that's why I'm being,
Well, you'll play a major role in that, as we will on our side, so keep that in mind.
So the 27th?
27th, I think, is what we need to do. March 27th.
March 27th.
So,
Yep.
So
Do we have
moved.
do we have a
Seconded.
Motion made and seconded. Liz?
In favor?
Dorothy? Norman?
in favor?
And I'm in favor. So we continue the hearing until March 27th, at which time we'll get it all done. Now, so now the hearing is closed. So, to me, let me just say that as much of a difficult process as has been, trying to please so many different fronts, I'm encouraged that we're going to take this facility up here and turn it into something that's very positive. And the fact of the matter is, unfortunately, we've been talking about dollars and cents and not lives changed. So, to me, if we save one life, everything that we just went through, worth it.
but quite honestly, we're gonna save a lot more than that.
Okay,
Thank you.
good. Thank you. Bruce, you're up. Let's go. No.
That went better than...
So Bruce did get one. That makes me feel better. Bruce got one too. April 13th. Oh, March 13th. No.
You get 5% of this favor. Eric. You get 5% of it. 142. Yes. It's all right, so there was still 75%.
So, here's the funny part. There's no one's phone backwards?
No.
So, I should probably read that out, John.
Yeah. Well, originally we had talked in 2 payments.
Well, it's 40 payments, 25,000. Is that to us?
Okay. So it's 25. Okay.
I have to say.
No. The planting is down here. the subtotal for the planting is 20,000. This is for the pavement and drainage, $30,000 for drainage.
I need to tell Tammy that in July, I am not going to be here. I'm going to France, to Devon. As I went down to Bahamas to celebrate my sister's 70th birthday, she's having the official party 6 months later in France.
Liz, is that amazing? Tammy right outside the door? Yeah, but there's $1,650.
There's no label?
Okay, that's why. If she says so. 6,300, that's bad. How'd she know?
She reads your mind. She's telepathic.
We're supposed to get those big recycling bins anyway, right? We can put a couple of those out there.
Okay. It's late. We're gonna move fast. Before at least I fall asleep. Enough of what we just went through. Next one is to hear from Attorney James Burke regarding 40B project to be located on Spruce Street. Floor is yours, sir.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the zoning board. I received a revision from John Whitten. I did have an opportunity to review it, and I'm pleased to tell you that we are not that far off in substantially close in most areas. There is, and if I can provide you with a copy, Mr. Chairman, I think John was missing a prior waiver list that was back in May. And I've even tried to do some tracking so that you can see it here. And they're not substantial. But you know, based on some of the discussions that John and I were just having in terms of modification, I can either go over them with you, or I think we're substantially close.
If you want to go over, the floor is yours.
All right, great. What would you like to do? How about the agreement, or do you want to do the waivers?
Do the waivers.
All right. Again, there are no changes until you go down to page 2 of 4, and then section IBA2. There was language that I had put in. John didn't want in. We reached a resolution. I see his language in the permit, and that's fine with me. It basically says that unless and until the roadway is accepted by the town of Middleborough, it's a private way. And that's a solid statement of the law anyway, so that's fine. There are a couple of new requests on page 3 of 4, and Jim Pavlik's here if in fact you need some clarification on them, but I think they're all modest. Basically, what we're suggesting is that we're looking for some language changes in relation to the Board of Health regulations, the Planning Board regulations. Owners will maintain trees and supervision for the maintenance, so the trees will be the homeowners association. Jim, come on up. You're going to have to help with the new request starting, I guess, there and there.
Okay.
And outline it for the...
What page are you on again?
Page 3. of the waiver list?
Yep.
Yes. The changes that we made, and again, this goes back probably to last spring, but these changes were based on feedback that we got from the board at that time, where you guys were looking for additional language or clarifying language on some of the waivers that we were talking about at the time. So that's what we've done here. And on page 3, section 4F, 3B, and C, it had to do with the street trees, and we've simply added language that the owners shall maintain the trees, and supervision for that maintenance shall be by the homeowners association. On page 4, again, it was similarly back at the time had originally talked about the waivers. The board had requested additional clarifying language, and so regarding the Middleborough Board of Health regs and the 30-minute perk rate, we added additional language that the applicant may seek a waiver, and the waiver will be granted as an insubstantial change, provided the request will not result in an unsafe or unsanitary condition and meets Title V requirements. The point at that is that the town has a regulation that perk rates have to be 30 minutes or less. Title V says we can go up to 60 minutes per inch. So we're adding that additional language. That we don't anticipate that any perks on site are going to be over 30 minutes, but if on the odd chance the soil conditions are such that it may be, we're going to request a waiver at that time for that particular lot. And the changed wording on the next two waiver requests, again, it's similar in that if we need a waiver regarding these conditions or requirements, we would request it just for that one specific lot and not routinely across the board for the project.
Can I make a comment on that, Mr. Chairman? When you view your renewed request about the possibility of building below the slope of the street, with the thought in the previous request about changing the perk rate, isn't it conceivable that in a town like Middleborough, that these potential places might flood? I'm assuming, I'm not an engineer, but I'm assuming the reason they have a perk rate, a certain amount, deals with drainage. And if the drainage is insufficient, and then we allow buildings below the street level, they don't seem to be, make sense to me, either one of those two ideas.
Well, again, the site is such that it's kind of a ridge, so it's sloping off down towards the wetlands on one side, and the lots that we might look at needing this waiver would be on those sloping lots, where the roadway would be up higher and the lots are sloping down, so that it wouldn't be a concern for flooding. It's just a simple matter of the grades, and the requirement means that you have to raise the foundation elevation to be that much higher above the elevation of the road, when there may be times when, due to the slope, the house could be located further down on the slope without otherwise causing any flooding issues or things like that.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, go ahead.
we had this exact issue on a 40B, and I believe it was Crimson Estates, and it's on a slope, and the house is at the bottom of the hill, and the house is below street grade, and the drainage from the street overruns the berm, and it flooded the house, cracked the foundation, and the homeowner has no recourse because the developer is gone, and is stuck with the house with a cracked foundation because the water was running in. I'm strongly opposed to this because I really don't want to see that happen again, and I'm not saying it would happen in this exact instance, but we already have a demonstration of where we've allowed this to happen and have had a problem, and the homeowner's got no recourse other than to fix the issue himself.
Mr. Chair, and
Yes,
one
go
other
ahead.
question. I'm having a little trouble remembering the exact details of this project. But do we not then run into the problem of wetlands? If you're telling me it's near wetlands and it's on a slope, it's in effect running, the piece of land is running on a ridge, how close are we then to the wetland, the conservation designation of wetland? And then what does that do then to drainage of coming off of the road, coming off and flowing by? I'm actually quite in agreement with you, I remember that.
To move this along, I have a suggestion. Why don't we do the same language we've done a couple of other things? That we can request a waiver on any particular lot, and it'll be deemed an insubstantial change, and then we can make a presentation if we need to, back before the board, and then deal with it that way.
Okay?
Yeah, we can deal with it on a case-by-case basis, but again, that just reiterate my point, that's all.
No, I agree with you. I don't want to see the water below the street level. And water running in on anybody.
Well, I mean, the catch basins are there, but the water's just
Yeah, but-
overrunning the catch basins, and it's created a huge issue, and it's a
Catch basins don't always catch everything.
well, the developer will be here and gone, and what will be left will be left.
If it doesn't work, don't approve it. But, you know, if it's a reasonable request, then maybe it's something we can do.
Okay, we can move on,
Yeah,
that's all.
okay, good point.
So I think both of those, the second and third waivers are similar language, same effect. We then moved down the page and on regarding the Town of Middleborough Conservation Commission policy, we changed the wording. Well, basically, we're going to comply with the Wetlands Protection Act and its regulations at 310 CMR. This conservation policy from 2007 came into effect after the project was filed.
Which number are you on?
It's on the fourth page, about 3/4 of the way down,
Oh, it's on 4, okay, sorry.
regarding the Conservation Commission policy.
What is the difference between the language that you've stricken, which basically says originally waive strict compliance, and I assume you want to remove the adjective strict, right? Is that what I'm interpreting that as? But what is the difference between that language? What's the difference between compliance and strict compliance?
What's the difference between strict compliance and compliance?
You either comply or you don't
Oh, I see,
comply.
okay.
I think the point was that
That's what I'm kind of asking.
you were making the point that this came into effect after the project was filed,
I was
so it doesn't
understanding
apply.
the review.
I think what may have been inartfully done, but to eliminate any confusion, I don't think that policies have any force of law. And I think the language was just to make it clear, because that's our next step. we have to file with the Conservation Commission.
Well, I was going to bring that up next.
Right, and so it really rather than fight with them, because clearly the policy doesn't apply on a 40B project.
Right.
It'd be easier if we could get the waiver from the board, and then we don't have to have that level of discussion or disagreement. That's what was intended to be done. But we do apply with the normal wetland protection. And in this instance, there's actually a couple of spots that Jim is going to have to work pretty hard, because we've got, I think we need a federal permit.
Yes.
Yeah, at one point too. So there's a little work to be done there.
And the last waiver was regarding the planning board department, planning department's street tree planting guidelines. And again, at the last discussion we had on this, you were looking for clarifying language on what we were going to specify for the planting of the trees, so that this attempts to detail that. We were talking about putting 2 street trees on each lot within a 10-foot wide street tree easement running parallel to the right-of-way.
This is an economic issue too, but it's also, the idea is we definitely want to have some sort of policy in place that you can identify what the tree issue is going to be. So we're trying to resolve it that way, but it is an economic issue. If we had to comply with the planning board regulations, it would become somewhat uneconomic to do it. But we think this is kind of a fair compromise. It assures the board that it's going to get the plantings that it's looking for.
What is the planning, what are the reasons for going around the existing regulations?
Go ahead and explain.
As we had discussed previously, the planning department's guidelines calls for a number of inspections, from starting up the nursery, inspecting the trees there, inspecting the trees that are delivered to the site, and then the actual installation process. It's a very rigorous, time-consuming and costly oversight. And our point is, if we install the tree on the people's lots, they're bound to take good care of them. They're going to be a part of the landscape there. And if the trees die, then it's a very simple thing to, it's known that they're dead. It's not something that's going to be hidden. And the homeowners association would have some enforcement there to make sure that they're replaced.
So you're suggesting that there should be no time frame from the time you plant it until the homeowner is responsible for it?
No, they would be, the
I
homeowner.
I understand your basic theme in the long term, but I'm talking about in the short term. So you plant a tree today, right? You sell the property and the tree dies tomorrow. Who replaces it?
The builder would have a 1-year warranty, I think, typically, and
Well, whatever it is, I think there should be a time frame in there from the initial time of planting.
What seems reasonable to you?
I don't know, a year or something along that line.
That seems
Right.
fine.
That way we know we've at least got reasonable stock when you put it in.
Providing it's maintained as well.
Yeah.
After it goes in.
Yeah, but I mean, at least you got a chance.
Did you not also ask earlier, you want to change the size of the trees that have gone in? On
No.
one of your requests?
not the size. We're going to use the species that are listed in the document. I think maybe the spacing, there's a prior waiver regarding the spacing of the trees.
Mm-hmm, that's what it is.
So we're suggesting there's going to be trees left in between the homes, and we would provide 2 additional new trees across the frontage.
So to summarize this, if we grant you all of these changes, what is the net result from what the town requires today to what the homeowner is going to get by the time he buys his lot?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
The question basically is, what is the change? Summarize all of them, there's half a dozen. In layman's terms.
Starting with the first change that we had?
Yep.
The first one had to do with the roadway cross-sections, and we eliminated language that's talking about eventually the town may accept the ways. So I don't think there's any impact there to the homeowners. The ways are still going to be private until such time that the town might accept them.
Okay. Next page.
Yeah, so there's several, two waivers that we're talking about regarding the street trees. And we've added simply here language to ensure their proper survival and maintenance. So I think it's further surety that the trees are going to be in good condition and be maintained. And then the three waivers regarding...
Can I ask you one question?
Sure.
Since that's down near the bottom of the page. How soon is a homeowners association in effect from the time the first person buys the house?
I think with John's plans, the homeowner association has to be in effect before anybody buys the home.
Okay, but you gotta have somebody there.
Well, yeah, obviously, the way they do it in the condo, for example, is the developer will be the initial trustees. So they would have the responsibility up until they move it forward.
Okay, so should it have language in there that the developer is responsible for the maintenance until the formation of a homeowners association?
That'd be fine.
Okay.
That's fine. I mean, that's going to be the reality of it, so that's fine.
At least it puts the maintenance on the developer. Next page is where they all exist.
Yeah, so the Board of Health regulations, as we've discussed, these are, all three of them are only going to be, will come back to the board if we find that we have a lot with tough soil conditions or a steep slope, and that we need to make some type of a waiver request. So it's only in the event, again, we don't foresee it, we're simply asking for it if such conditions occur.
Okay, that's the first one then?
All three, I think,
All
are in the
three?
same, yeah, what we've discussed is that we're only going to come back here if we need to request those waivers.
Any other questions? No? We got the trees? Is there a motion then to accept changes outlined? That's a good question. Who is voting on this?
Mr. Chair.
It's not on the same people, right, Jim? What's the name voting on it? It's not from the original vote.
It doesn't have to be?
It should be, it doesn't have to be, but it should be since the applicant filed for the 54 unit plan. But I think we have it here.
We just don't know who they are. None of us remember. Who voted on this originally, do you remember?
I see a lot of familiar faces here.
Very good.
I think in terms of the waivers, it's probably okay, I wouldn't worry about it. When we get to a final decision for the ultimate decision, I think we'll
Okay.
Well, not knowing, let's all vote.
I
was just
think
gonna
it's a
say
great
that.
idea.
That's exactly what I was going to say. Is there a motion then to accept all these waivers as outlined for the project? Somebody want to make that a motion? Or any other way you want to put it?
Begrudgingly so moved.
I'll reluctantly second.
Is that a second?
These are going to be rewritten, is that what we're going to do?
These are going to be,
These so-called new requests or changes are going to be rewritten at some time?
this will be attached to the
Well,
existing.
I understand that, but I'm saying somebody's going to rewrite them, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
we will.
Particularly the deal with the perk tests and the slope and potential for flooding.
Would you like it to go to Tammy, or would you like it to go to John?
I think for me, if John,
Fine,
I think
then
we
we'll,
could.
we'll get it to John by the end of next week.
And I think just, if I could, Mr. Chairman, just to pick up on that, Jim and I spoke very briefly with the meeting, but I think as Jim said, I think we're close, and maybe, if it's okay with you, Jim, we redline this draft, and at the same time send me the review.
Be happy to.
On waivers, and what has comes on, once we get into the next meeting, and I think we'll have a final.
Okay.
Why should we come in?
Does that work with you?
Will you miss me?
Yeah.
Oh, you'll be here representing another one.
It works for me.
Mr. Chair, did we actually vote?
No, we haven't yet.
We haven't yet.
Are we voting on whether or not we're going to miss him?
No, on the motion on the table.
The motion on the table is to accept the changes that are outlined here that we just went down through for the project on Crimson Estates.
We have the motion, and the second.
Okay.
Yeah, now we're going to vote
Yeah.
in favor.
You're in favor?
In favor.
You're in favor?
I'm in favor.
You're in favor?
I'm in favor.
You're in
In
favor?
favor?
I'm in favor.
So we're all in favor.
Let's wrap this up the next meeting, and thank you all very much.
You mean you don't want to come back here again?
No, I enjoy coming back here. Well, no, I enjoy coming back to this board.
On March 13th or 27th? You're here for the 27th, I think, the high point.
27th is fine. Thank you.
Okay.
Good.
That's going to be another long night.
Okay. Item 4.
Do we have to vote for continuance?
You want to vote on the continuance?
Right. What was that?
We need a motion to continue it to the 27th.
So
really?
moved.
Second. In favor.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries.
This is, just so the audience knows what we're voting on, gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen. It's the petition of attorney Peter Freeman for Robert Estates. Construct 12 single-family dwellings, be continued until the 27th.
No, that's what we're doing.
No,
Boy, we're getting rid of you real quick.
I tell you, it is late, and I don't mind not staying long, but
Just continue Spruce Street.
Get
That
out
one
of
we're gonna open up.
You're not going to be long?
I said I don't mind being long since it's so late. I must be getting old, I'm tired.
You're not as old as I am yet, and I'm tired.
Okay.
He's on the agenda. We just continued Spruce Street to the 27th, but he's on right now.
Okay. To hear the petition of attorney Peter Freeman for Robert Estates LLC, Realtors request to allow for the construction of 12 single-family dwellings pursuant to Mass General Laws, Chapter 40B. Property is located at 711 Plymouth Street, Middleborough, Assessors Map 44, Lot 2669, in the residence of Roaring Rural District. Declare the hearing open. Floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members. What we needed to do at the end of the last hearing, and there were a couple of continuances in part because of my schedule, and I forget the other reason, maybe one member wasn't here, but in any case, we wanted to get okay from fire department as to the access and egress. There was a letter that was submitted. Likewise, from the police chief, who basically said that he had commented, and now as long as the DPW or the highway department was satisfied, that he would be satisfied. And that leads to the third point. One of the major things that we had said that we would offer by way of mitigation
is the realignment of the Rocky Meadows Street and Plymouth Street. So there has been work on that. Jim Pavlik from Outback explained that at the last hearing, and there was back and forth between your consultant, the DPW, and our engineer, Jim, and my client directly. And in fact, I believe it was yesterday, they went out to the site, and so there was a follow-up to the January 21st DPW letter. There was a letter from Mr. Brennan just today, I believe, because the site visit was yesterday, that basically summarized both the agreement between, I believe, Mr. Brennan agreeing to what the DPW expressed their satisfaction with and their preferences, and my clients, both directly and through Jim Pavlik, agreeing to do on the road realignment. So, in a nutshell, what we had set out to do was to try to bring closure to those items, as well as closure to the few things that were in the December 21st letter, a previous letter from your peer review consultant, Amory Patrick Brennan, and then the December 21st letter, which I believe we had gone over at the last hearing. So what I would propose to do right now is to have Jim summarize where we're at with his revised plans and I believe the satisfaction that has been achieved. And then naturally Mr. Brennan is here and, rather than us summarize, perhaps he can summarize his letter. And the only other thing, just before I conclude for the moment, would be, and I don't think it'll be tonight because it is late, but hopefully to be able to get to draft a decision for the next hearing and then go over the decision and waivers at the next hearing. On that point, whether or not we get to it now or next hearing, in most likelihood, in going over the waiver request, we did find that we inadvertently had left something out. So it's a Board of Health thing about lot size. We have 12,000, 13,000, one 17,000 square foot lot, and there's something about a 15,000 square foot minimum without Board of Health variances. So if you have questions about that, Jim can talk about that. But again, I'm thinking that given the hour and all of that we would do what I just said, and in all likelihood talk about the waiver requests all together, probably at the next hearing. But I'll just, so I don't forget, I'll submit that now.
Good evening. The changes we made to the plan were relatively minor. And I'm going to hand in additional copies of plans. This is the latest plan set. Spread out. So the changes primarily had to do with the intersection of Rocky Meadow Street. As Mr. Freeman indicated, we had met with DPW and Pat Brennan yesterday and made some changes on the location of that intersection to best provide for sight distance, and there was also some additional length of berm that was provided along the edge of the roadway there. The other changes were to incorporate a beehive grate at the bottom of the slope along the Freitas property line. The beehive grate is just, instead of being a typical flat catch basin, it's just a rounded type of top that allows for water to seep in rather than getting clogged with leaves. There was also a note added regarding the wheelchair ramp detail to comply with ADA and AAB requirements. Primarily, those were the only changes to the plans. There was also some discussion regarding roof drains. current drainage design that we had was not including any roof drainage. We found the soils were very permeable on site, and we were capturing most of the runoff in the catch basins that would be directed to underground leaching pits in 3 locations, and those were sufficiently sized to infiltrate all of the runoff up to a 100-year storm. So we didn't incorporate any roof drainage as a separate drainage system. And I'll let Pat discuss this further, but I think what we've talked about is if the board is going to require it, then I think the idea was that we would be able to, distribute the runoff from the roofs over, basically spreading it out across the lot a little bit more, or across the entire property a little bit more, rather than capturing it in just those 3 primary drainage locations. Those are essentially the changes, and I understand we have received feedback from the fire department and DPW and police chief, so I think we've addressed primary technical issues, and I open it to any questions.
Any questions from the board? I only have one. Louise Lane will come out where on Plymouth Street, what landmark? And I noticed that Rocky Meadow Street will now come out at a right angle, correct?
Correct.
Just at the top of the hill.
That's at the, Louise Lane is at the top of the hill?
I'm assuming it was at the bottom. Rocky Meadow comes out.
It's near the top of the hill,
At the
yes.
top of the hill.
Yeah.
Rocky Meadow is going to come out near the top of the hill?
It's a
Is
little.
that what you just said?
Yeah, it'll be closer. Louise
Closer.
Lane is actually at the top, I would say, as far as elevation. But you're gonna be closer at a 90-degree angle, which would be better than what's already existing now.
That's right.
Right now, it's a fork,
Yeah,
basically.
it's-
And we're gonna.
It is.
We're going to make it a 90-degree turn. We've added notes there, there's going to be some bollards across that, what will be new landscaped area, where the pavement's gonna be removed. So it'll prevent any cars from otherwise trying to cut across through there, but I think it's the kind of thing, once it's repaved and realigned like that, it'll take some time to get used to it. There was actually a request to provide some intersection ahead signs at all 3 approaches, 500 feet away, and so that'll give some advance warning notice that the intersection is being realigned. But over time, people will become used to it, and you'll find that cars will slow down. And
I'm not sure what your traffic study said exactly, but the problem is probably more people coming down Plymouth Street from the Carver side. Because you're coming down the hill, coming up the hill, people are forking in, it just is made for an interesting intersection.
Anything should be better than what it is, in my opinion.
The 90-degree angle will force people to stop,
That's right.
which is going to, as far as a safety factor, is going to increase the safety.
Right now, you're not sure who's going to stop.
No, well, it's kind of a race, see who gets there first.
First come, first served.
Actually, in the letter from Pat, Mr. Peck recommended in his letter of January 21st that the signs read caution, new intersection alignment. So
Right.
those are the ones, the 3 that are going to be going up?
Yes.
Right?
Anybody in the audience want to look at these plans? Any questions on them? Yes, John.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just 2 comments. And I think when Attorney Freeman was here at the opening hearing, I think I made this comment, but we haven't met formally in a while, so I just want to make sure I said it then, because if I didn't, I want to say it now. So the two issues before the board, from my perspective, are, one is it's a subdivision with no open space. It's 12 lots, there's 0 open space. The open space is the cul-de-sac. So for the board's consideration, it's a comprehensive permit. You certainly have the right, and we even have Housing Appeals Committee decisions respecting the right of a board to impose conditions of open space. So whether that's fewer lots or more creative design, that's up to the board. And then the second issue is one that Attorney Freeman and I have been around before in the past, and I suspect we're going to be back on this one as well, and that is the board's power to endorse a subdivision plan. So I raised it before, I just want to make sure I raise it again, especially if the applicant is going to ask the board to close the hearing soon. So the board's being asked to both endorse the plan for recording at the Registry of Deeds, as well as approve the comprehensive permit. There's no question the board approves or conditions the comprehensive permit. The outstanding issue, based on 14 years of litigation on the Rocky Gutter case, is whether the board can actually legally endorse the plan for recording at the Registry of Deeds. We may be able to defer that argument to a later date, and Attorney Freeman and I can have a conversation to perhaps work it out. There is a way to do it, I think, that both parties can be satisfied with. But I just want to mention that, that and the whole planning issue of open space. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Go ahead.
My turn?
No.
Oh.
It will be in a minute.
Okay.
Oh, sure. No lengthy response. Thank you, John. I do remember those points on the subdivision. I purposely haven't written a memo or gone further into it because I would like to talk to you. Hopefully there is some way to resolve it. I do have a difference of opinion. On the other hand, I know you've been litigating that forever, so I'm not going to bore you with citations of legal things and all of that. On the open space, my only point is twofold. One, none of the commentary from the town boards and departments and peer review have suggested that the plan suffers from lack of open space. We have, albeit smaller than what the zoning requires, obviously, but we do have 12,000, 13,000 square foot and one 17,000 square foot lot, and we thought that it's better to have, you know, the larger lots in terms of the residential feel and the neighborhood and all of that. Two, if any condition was imposed for open space, that would result in fewer lots. There are just two impacts. One, we sincerely believe it makes it uneconomic, and I hope important to the board, don't forget, we had said at the last hearing that my client voluntarily offered mitigation in 3 ways that he will do and is committed to with the 12-lot subdivision, but just wouldn't be economically viable with fewer lots. So everything is a trade-off. I understand absolutely 40B conditions and all of that, but you know, we think it's a good trade-off to have monetary donation to the town for sports or something else, to a cancer nonprofit. The realignment itself is, you know, part of the mitigation, and the fourth affordable unit. Initially, we applied for 3, the 25%. So the only other thing before, I guess, comments from Pat Brennan is I said his December 21st letter. It was actually December 12th was the previous to February 27th letter from A. Marie Associates. And again, I probably should just shut up right now. The comments, I believe, basically are now indicating with today's letter that the questions and any concerns had been addressed. The only thing that the rest of the letter goes on to is discussion of the waivers, which again, we can talk about that now or at the next hearing. So I think that, you know, we, with all the things that Jim just described, I think that we really have accomplished what we wanted to, that hopefully will satisfy the board, and I will stop there. Thanks.
Questions, Norman?
Mr. Chairman, I think this is a very dangerous situation whereby these 2 intersections are so close together. I believe the planning board has a standard for 500-odd feet. And by reducing the intersection to a minimum, this thing here looks like about 200 feet, we're going to establish a precedent that all these mongrel small-town lots around town are going to be 40Bs with dangerous intersections. I'm totally against this proposal here.
Thank you. Anybody else?
I had a tad bit of confusion. Mr. Freeman, did you not say that you have to go before the Board of Health or
No.
on
No,
lot
I said-
size?
No, I said that along with the other waivers that we submitted, it's a similar kind of waiver. There's a waiver which was from, there was a bylaw from actually a long time ago before current Title V standards. I believe it was 1971, and Title V has been substantially updated since then, and naturally we comply with Title V. What I said was the sheet I just handed in that Outback prepared was there's a Board of Health regulation that says the Board of Health would ordinarily need to give a waiver if you have a lot less than 15,000 square feet that has connection to town water and an on-site septic system. So, again, like with all the 40B, other requests, we just said that that's another request we're making to the zoning board. And I would just remind the board that I understand the concern that was expressed as to the road intersection proximity, but our traffic consultant addressed that, I think, completely. And again, that we think it's safe, the DPW is satisfied, and we're improving the situation, so that's my only comment on that.
As you're aware, I voiced it before, it's not too far from where I live. So I go across there. I can appreciate the straightening out of the road. That to me makes sense. But it doesn't make much sense to me to have such small lots in a rural residential area. And if you look at the plan, we're going from 80,000 square foot down to 12,000. That doesn't call for a substantial house or anything. To me, that is much too dense. Somebody in the audience have a question or a comment? Go ahead.
Good evening. My name is Joseph Keller. I represent Jean Freitas, who's in a butter to this lot. She has several concerns about this project, and they were addressed in a letter by Rob Kraus from my office in January 14th of this year, I believe that was sent. But I'm just going to address one of them, and that is control of the lot. And the case law is pretty clear that an applicant has to have control over the lot. And there's some serious questions whether this applicant has control over the lot. There's a case that is brought by Cavello Construction against these applicants. They've obtained 6 attachments of $200,000 apiece. One of them this very lot in question. And this was not an ex parte attachment. This was an attachment, a motion where both sides briefed it, and Judge Troy, the Suffolk Superior Court, found that there was a reasonable likelihood of success that Cavello Construction would win, and gave them a $200,000 attachment. This was back in November. And usually when there's an attachment this size, the applicant will put up collateral, cash, or bond. That has not been done in this case. So we have a project here where that if Mr. Cavello is successful, he could force a sale of this land to collect in his judgment. And there's been, based upon that, I don't think that this applicant can show that he has control of the land. And that alone is a basis for denial. And I ask that the board look into that very seriously. Because this is an ongoing litigation that was just filed last year that could go to trial in maybe a year or two. So you could grant this comprehensive permit, there's an attachment in place. I don't know how they're going to sell any lots with this attachment in place unless they satisfy Cavello Construction. So that is some serious impediments along with some other issues, but I think that the board should look into that, and I know your town council is aware of that. So that's what I have to address, and I think that is a basis, that alone is a basis to deny this, that their lack of control over this lot. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions? Go ahead.
Thank you. On that point, that was just addressed by counsel. I had seen his memo, and as the board knows, I submitted a memo. It's dated February 24th. It was emailed to the board. I'm not going to summarize all of it. I hope you read it, but in a nutshell, I do believe that the law is clear, that my brother counsel is actually totally wrong, whether it's a 40A or a 40B. I cited the 40B cases. There were 2 very analogous cases. In the essence of the rulings, one of which was upheld by the land court, is that those are private contract matters. It does not speak to the kind of site control that indeed is part of the 40B jurisdictional process, and Mass Housing found that there is site control because there's a valid purchase and sale agreement. There sometimes are land title disputes about the quality of title or access, that they go on in land court or in superior court, and the case law is very consistent and strong that those are not matters that a zoning board should be concerned with. And the cases that are very relevant are the two that I cited, the first one being Paragon Residential Properties versus Brookline ZBA. There was actually a bankruptcy for the developer and the seller, related parties, and there was an injunction against the sale of the property in question. And both the Housing Appeals Committee, in this case it was the Housing Appeals Committee, basically said what I just said, that it does not give a zoning board ground to delay or reject or deny the comprehensive permit. It's a separate private matter that the courts will resolve. And as to Mass Housing, the subsidizing agency in both the cases I cited and in our case, if they were to take action, they're going to take action at final approval stage after the hopefully granting of a comprehensive permit, and that's when it would be handled, not at the ZBA stage. And the second case is Greenview Realty, which also involved attachments. They were DEP liens from some hazardous waste problem. It was over $1 million, and basically exactly the same holdings by HAC, Housing Appeals Committee, in that case upheld by the land court. So I think that those cases completely address the memo that was submitted and the comments by counsel just now. So, in terms of where we're at, I think we need to continue. And if you want to hear from Mr. Brennan, and if you want back and forth on the question of what you should do with the proposal as submitted, obviously that's fine. We're happy to engage in that discussion. Thanks.
Thank you. Anybody else in the audience have any comments, questions?
Well, I have two things.
Go ahead.
We have letters that we should probably read in from fire chief, police chief, and I think that's it.
I saw the fire chief.
No. No. I thought I had, let me see here. Wait a second. Yeah, it seems to have the Middleborough Fire Department logo. But it's not from the, and it says Middleborough Fire Department, but I guess it's from Deborah Burke, the captain. So it's not the chief. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. But the other thing is the site control. So I'll just make this comment. The applicant has to prove site control to Mass Housing and in the application process. And I've never heard of where a case in litigation without a final outcome ever stopped a 40B from the process of it. And in fact, I seem to remember a case that's probably almost 13 years old at this point, where the site control has never been determined, and we're still fighting it. And so, to me, I think it would be wholly inappropriate to stop the process due to pending litigation on something that, and I think you voiced it well, it isn't until the final approval or something happens before that that changes the game, whereby we would consider stopping. But to my recollection, I've never heard of that happening. And I don't think pending litigation translates into loss of site control. So I think the two of them combined, to me anyway, as one member says, let's roll on and let's go through the process. So that's my only comment on that. Would you like me to read the letters, Mr. Chairman? The first one is very easy. It's in like 20-point type.
Yes, that's a good one.
It is. I can see it clearly. It's dated February 7th, 2014, from Chief Bruce Gates. Zoning Board, I have already expressed my concerns with Louis Estate project. If the DPW director is satisfied these issues have been mitigated and addressed, I would concur with his decision. Bruce Gates. And the second one comes from our captain, Deborah Burke, dated January 21st, 2014, in regards to the modifications to the cul-de-sac plan. Zoning Board, the Middleborough Fire Department has reviewed the revised plan submitted by Outback Engineering due to the new apparatus acquired in recent years, and in parentheses, tower truck. The turning radius had to be changed, allowing all apparatus to be able to maneuver safely, and this would provide effective safety operations in all incidents. The plan submitted would be acceptable to take care of this issue. The emergency access for Louise Estates is acceptable as submitted. If the board has any questions or concerns, please feel free to call me, Deborah Burke, Captain. And then we have, do we need to read this, Chris Peck?
No.
DPW Director? No?
No, it goes
Because
on.
I think, right, yeah, that, well, let me just go over the,
You can highlight it if you want.
yeah, more salient points. Anyway, this is from Christopher Peck, our DPW Director. And on January 9th, 2014, he met with the applicant, Bill Logan, and his engineer from Outback Engineering. They reviewed the two alternatives based upon, from hole 169. And there were two alternatives, and there's a 2.5-foot elevation difference between the two. And the second alternative having the higher elevation. It was seen in the field that the second alternative provides much improved vertical sight distance looking west down Plymouth Street versus the first. So we'd also, as Jim has pointed out from Outback, they've requested the concrete bollards to be placed along the road's edge in the area, remove roadway to prevent vehicles, which is already there, and he's also requested that monolithic berm or Cape Cod berm be placed on both sides of the newly paved area, which the applicant has provided. And then he recommends, as we've already talked about, signs reading caution, new intersection alignment, or an approved beacon will be installed 500 feet from the intersection in both directions on Plymouth Street, as well as 500 feet before the intersection in Rocky Meadow. In addition, MUTCD designated W2-2T intersection warning signs should be placed on the same post with the word ahead placed underneath. Did you get that?
Got that.
So respectfully submitted, very truly yours, Christopher Peck.
Thank you. Anybody have any other questions, comments? Anybody in the audience have anything they'd like to say? If not, what's the pleasure of the board? Somebody like to make a motion?
When are you going to meet again on this issue?
To continue.
Are you gonna have John start the draft decision?
I'm not going to do that yet, from what I heard. Don't have to. We can either have a motion to bring it to a conclusion, or we can have a motion to continue it. I can tell you right now that I don't intend to approve it. Because of the two things that I mentioned, I don't think that you should, the requirement for a lot is 80,000 square feet, and you're going down to 12. It's too crowded. It is not worth it, in my opinion. I do like the idea of the new entrance on the Plymouth Street from Rocky Meadow. That is good, but I can't take that over the rest of this. So I can tell you, I don't intend to approve it. Anybody else feel the same way? We can take a motion to bring it to a conclusion, or we can take a motion to continue it for whatever reason you want to continue it.
Well, is there any discussion by the applicant in the reduction of the number of units? Do you know? I mean, is there?
Tim Hatcher, owner of the project. when we put together the plan, we were trying to make what we thought was a win-win for everybody involved in the situation, and that's what we came up with. And I understand that, you think it's, the lots are 12, 13, 17,000 square foot lots, but everything we put together on that with the fourth affordable for a vet and everything else we talked about was on that plan, and that's the only thing
So is that, no, you can't reduce the number of units?
I'd have to look at it. I mean, for everything we've offered at this point, I think that would be a lot to ask for us. I'd have to really review that.
I think that's
I
what
mean-
exactly the chairman is asking, if hear him, right? So,
I mean, it's a substantial amount of offerings, I believe we made. I respectfully think the board would agree.
Density is a huge issue for us with any of these type of projects.
I agree. I just, well, I mean, I agree with, I look at it, say it was 10 lots, 8 lots, 12 lots. I don't know, I mean, with all due respect to the Freitas's, I don't want one drop of water to go from that property to their property. That was the first thing I told Outback Engineering. There's not one drop of water I want there. I want to improve their situation over there. I just don't know, with everything we offered, the donations to the children's, and I'm just, whose life's gonna change if there's 10 lots or 12 lots is mine. No, I mean, I know it's,
everybody just involved. How much people live right next to it?
I mean, if there's 10 lots there or 12 lots there, I'm
Well, if we could get down to, theoretically, we could get down to 10. And you could increase lot size by, I don't know, maybe 1,000 square feet or more.
and that's kind of my point, it's really, and what we, I mean, you guys can, say what you do, I was trying to put it together a win-win, that's all.
Well, you have to look at it from our perspective too. I mean, we get developers in here who want to cram just exactly as much as possible on as small a footprint as they possibly can.
Oh, I know, and that's why we're trying to give back at the same time, to try to,
And after doing that for quite a few years, we've got a pretty good flavor for how things are going to turn out. And like, we've had some issues in the previous hearing, like I mentioned before, with elevations and different things. You try to learn from the mistakes. So I'm not saying your intentions weren't good. It's just from a planning standpoint, this just looks extremely clustered for what the neighborhood is. And you have to appreciate that too. So, I would make a motion that we continue and
I will
give it some
second
thought.
that motion.
Give it some thought. I mean, at some point, we've got to move forward anyway, but if you have a consideration for reducing maybe some of the density, I'd be open to suggestion.
Okay.
Myself. I'm only speaking for myself. I'm not sure what the rest of the board feels.
March 13th? Okay, cool.
Motion to continue.
I don't know, give a date.
That,
Is there a
I would,
second?
I seconded it.
yep.
Okay.
I just need a date to continue with it. I have March 13th.
March 13th or the 27th? Actually, the 27th is
I'm
pretty
not
booked.
doing anything else on the 27th.
Okay.
Yeah,
We
and-
got High Points.
Yeah, you have a bunch. The 13th would work for us, so the 13th works, and that's certainly enough time, and,
Okay.
2 weeks to.
Yeah,
You wanna-
yeah.
Okay.
So the only thing, I have a conflict on the 13th, I'm not sure you need me, but I have a meeting in Concord that I get Barbara to cover, I'll be here, so I don't know.
And I would say,
See about reducing units.
what I would say is that,
Yeah.
and obviously, that's the board's choice, but I would like March 13th.
Well, if we can get to a place where we can do something different, which I'm hoping.
Yeah, that was, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to speak over you, I'm sorry.
Okay.
That would be my point, that let's see if we reach a consensus on the 13th. If we do, then we know that there'll still have to be a decision drafted,
Yes.
granting. And, we're okay with that extra time. If we don't, so be it. We'll
Okay.
certainly give it a good shot. So we'd appreciate the 13th. That's great.
So the 13th?
March 13th.
Got a motion and a second to continue it to March 13th. Those voting on it, Mr. Diegli,
Against.
Mrs. Pulsifer,
In favor? I won't be here on the 13th.
Well, we can't, I'll just put them on and see if they come up.
Ms. Eggleston,
In favor?
Mr. Priestley,
In favor?
and I'm against.
Need another motion.
So it doesn't pass.
No, it's a motion to continue.
Motion continued, only majority. So it did pass.
Excuse
Oh,
me. 3 to 2.
3 to 2? Who else voted against it? And Norm did?
And
Oh,
I,
yeah.
what?
I thought it was majority vote, so.
Yeah, 3 to 2 is still a majority.
Yeah,
3 to 2 is a majority.
3 to 2 is a majority, at least it was when we started.
No, I thought that's what I'm saying, I thought
I was thinking it had to be 4 to 1.
4 to 1 to kill it.
So it passed.
So it's
So it
continued to
passed.
March 13th.
March 13th. Okay, we're good.
I make a motion, we adjourn at 7 minutes to 11.
Second that motion.
I will second that.
So voted, Norman.
You guys should be Mike's